that's why more and more working families are falling further behind.
Okay, I do think they were falling in your final year, but I take your point on the average. But just back on this Sunday penalty rates, I mean, Labor talked a lot about, yes, increasing the minimum wage is one thing, but losing your Sunday was a big blow for a lot of people. They should be properly compensated and so on. So are you saying you still might do this? You might restore Sunday penalty rates?
We're saying that the next step is the minimum wage review, David, which reports quite soon. It makes more sense now. This is the difference between 2019 and 2022. As we've got that case underway right now, it makes sense to wait for the outcomes of that.
All right. So, OK, we'll see. On aged care workers, again, something the government can directly do. Would you boost the pay of aged care workers?
Well, it makes no sense to us, David, that aged care workers are some of the most important workers in our country, in our communities, and some of the worst paid. And so one of the recommendations out of the Royal Commission was that the government support the Fair Work Commission process to get a decent pay rise for these crucial workers. That's our position. We will support enthusiastically a pay rise for these workers. The reality is that whoever wins office in May will have to fund whatever the outcome of the Fair Work Commission process is. The difference between Labor and Liberal on this case is that Labor wants to see a genuine pay rise for these crucial workers. We've said that for, I think, about a year now, that we would support that case. The total cost of that depends on what the Fair Work Commission recommends and over what time frame, but either political party, if it wins office, would have to fund that outcome. Yeah,
you would have to fund it. The Aged Care Royal Commission did also recommend an aged care levy to help pay for these costs. Have you made a call on that one yet?
Yeah, we've said that we won't be going down that path, David. We've got other priorities in the budget. But I think it speaks to the government's priorities that they spent $17 billion in the aged care system and did almost nothing for the workers. We don't think that's a good outcome. The workforce is absolutely critical when it comes to aged care. They need and deserve a decent pay rise to do such an important job. The Fair Work Commission is looking at that and will report before long. We've said we'll support that process. Okay. A government of either persuasion would have to fund the outcome.
What about some other spending areas? Foreign aid. Anthony Albanese, in the last couple of days since the Solomon Islands struck this arrangement with China, has talked about the need to do more on foreign aid in the Pacific. Would Labor spend more on foreign aid?
Oh, well, clearly one of the reasons why, or we think it's no coincidence, David, frankly, that some of the places where the Chinese have been most assertive are areas where there have been the most significant cuts to foreign aid. You think about the Solomon Islands. I think in the last few years, foreign aid from Australia has gone down around 21%. It's for the government to explain the impact of those cuts.
The government says it's gone up for the Pacific.
Beg your pardon?
The government says foreign aid's gone up for the Pacific.
Yeah, the government's got this slogan about a Pacific step up. Since 2018-19, foreign aid to the Solomon Islands has gone down 21% in the budget. That's a reality.
So would you boost it?
Well, we will do better than the government when it comes to foreign aid, but we also need to recognise, you know, in doing that responsibly, our relationship with our Pacific friends and neighbours goes much more broadly than foreign aid. That's the point that Anthony Albanese has made as well. It goes to our position on climate change. It's about being trusted in the region on policies like climate. It's about making sure that we're spending our defence budget effectively, not spraying around billions of dollars in waste as the government has been doing. We need to take a broader look. The government's got a Pacific step up, which is effectively a slogan, which has been exposed. We need to do better for our Pacific friends and neighbours.
Right.
We do need to do that responsibly.
But you'll work it out in government. Is that what you're saying? How much more you'll spend on foreign aid?
Oh, no, we'll have a view on foreign aid, David, that people can assess at the election.
In the campaign, okay.
But what we've said is we weigh that up against all the other priorities, we'll be responsible about it, and it's not the whole story.
Do you still plan to provide free rapid antigen tests to all Australians as well?
Yeah, clearly. I mean, Australians need access to those tests. You know, the
situation...
What's
that going to cost?
Beg your pardon?
What's that going to cost?
Well, it depends on the need at the time when the budgets are handed down. But we've said for some time, you know, one of the issues was access to tests. The government's gone part of the way to dealing with that. The situation is evolving, as is the virus. And so we'll have a responsible position on that. But we've said for some time that people shouldn't be deterred from taking a test and protecting their workmates because they can't afford one.
So, look, we know Labor plans to spend more on childcare, TAFE, university, social housing, the NBN, the electricity grid, rapid tests, foreign aid, it seems, aged care workers. Are there any areas where you would spend less than the government?
Yes, David, clearly. I mean, areas like, for example, We think there's billions of dollars being wasted on contractors and consultants in the public service. Katie Gallagher has made that clear for some time, as has Anthony Albanese. There's an opportunity there. You know, clearly there are lots of discretionary funds where ministers have been rorting funding for political purposes rather than for an economic dividend. So I think Australians should expect that we will look to trim the budget in areas where the government's waste has been so egregious. Think of it this way, David. You know, if we win office in May, we will inherit a budget with $1 trillion in debt, barely anything to show for it, more than $30 billion of wastage. The government has committed $70 billion since the mid-year update in December. $70 billion. And so there will be opportunities for us to trim spending. We will be more responsible than the Liberal and National parties have been because we would inherit such a dire dire economic and budget situation.
This second budget later this year, if you win, you will be prepared to cut spending.
Yes, David, we've made that clear. You know, there are clearly areas where the government's wastage has been so egregious that we will look to trim spending. But we'll also look to grow the economy in ways that we've talked about. We will also look to change the way that multinationals are taxed here and work with countries around the world. We will also look to reprioritise spending, as John Keogh was talking about on your couch a moment ago. You know, this is not just a task for a budget that we would deliver if we win later this year. This is the task for every budget, to go through it line by line to make sure we're getting maximum bang for buck for taxpayers. That effort has been more or less missing for much of the last decade, and Australians deserve better than that.
What about superannuation? Would there be any changes to the superannuation rules?
Oh, look, we said about superannuation that we would maintain the system. You know, our efforts have been directed towards saving the superannuation guarantee from the government that was trying to prevent it going to 12%. That's been our highest priority. We've been defending the system from coalition attacks. Australians shouldn't expect major changes to superannuation if the government changes hands. What do major changes mean?
What about things like catch-up contributions? They still be allowed?
We haven't proposed it. We haven't proposed any changes to that, David.
And you won't?
Unlikely to.
Now, you talk about the rorts and waste. You're often critical of the government for the pork barrelling, as you call it, through these grant schemes. What about Labor's, $750 million spent so far on Labor and marginal seats for swimming pools, basketball courts, other local projects? How much do you plan to spend on these grants?
Well, we'll make all of our spending clear when we tally up our election commitments towards the end of the campaign, as every opposition and every government does.
You must have an envelope, though, an idea of how much you're going to spend here.
Well, we'll make that clear before the election, David, but the point I'm making is this, that the quality of our spending, our guiding light will be the quality of our spending. And some of those commitments that you've just mentioned are a consequence of lots of work with state governments and local councils and local communities. The difference couldn't be starker between a government which sits around poring over colour-coded spreadsheets. It gives one amount to one seat because it's Liberal, another amount to another seat because it's Labor.
Well, are you giving any to safe coalition seats?
Yes, we are, David.
Which ones?
Well, we've made a range of commitments, things like community batteries for solar power. You know, we've made in coalition seats. The difference is, David, we're looking for maximum community benefit and economic benefit. The government's looking for maximum political benefit.
OK, but I'm not sure which coalition seat you're talking about there. I'm not sure if you can tell us.
Well, I saw Chris Bowen in safe coalition seats on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland announcing solar batteries, for example, and I'm sure we could dig out more examples than that.
Let me ask you, finally, Andrew Charlton set to be named as Labor's candidate in Parramatta in the next couple of days, despite some local candidates from diverse backgrounds preferring a rank-and-file ballot to give local members a say. I know Andrew Charlton is a friend of yours. Why shouldn't branch members be given a say?
Well, look, ideally, in the normal course of events, branch members get an opportunity. We're very close to an election, and the National Executive has been asked to determine this one. I'm not a member of the New South Wales branch. I'm not a member of the National Executive, and I haven't been involved. But I will say this about Andrew Charlton. Andrew Charlton, if he's pre-selected this week and elected in May, will make an immense contribution to that community, to our party, to the parliament and to the nation. He is someone of extraordinary capability. I support him 100%, and I will proudly campaign for him and with him to keep that seat of Parramatta in Labor hands and to make a contribution to an Albanese Labor government.
You actually wrote an article, a piece for The Guardian last year with Andrew Charlton. you put forward a bunch of ideas together, including, quote, linking the tax and transfer system to ensure a minimum basic income for those who need it. So will you introduce a minimum basic income?
Well, these are the sorts of issues that a Labor government would look at, David. We've said that not just in that piece, which I enjoyed writing with Andrew. We've said that on a range of occasions. There is a medium-term and longer-term reform agenda, but we've made our immediate priorities clear.
All right. Jim Chalmers, Shadow Treasurer, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Well, let's return to our panel. We're joined once again by Shane Wright, Sarah Martin, John Keogh. Look, just quickly on that, we'll see Anthony Albanese's budget reply on Thursday night. My understanding is he'll have one announcement. The rest will be saved up for the campaign itself. But clearly there are a lot of areas where they're waiting for either the campaign or indeed to be in government to announce exactly what they'll do. Foreign aid. There are other issues like job seeker rate and so on. They've said, look, we'll have to wait and see. Is that fair enough, Shane?
Some of it is, but they've been in opposition for 9 years. Like there is a responsibility on them to come up with costed policies. The Parliamentary Budget Office is there. Yes, there are a lot of changing bits with the current budget. Ukraine, inflation, tightness of the jobs market. There's a lot going on, but that doesn't preclude the hard work that you have to do in opposition. And there is a fair accusation against Anthony Albanese, but they've been holding back and not trying to make too many promises because of how badly stung they were in 2019.
And the immediate decision for the coming week, he might not make a strong argument as to why cutting fuel excise is a responsible policy idea, but Sarah, it's very clear that Labor will back it.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think Labor's going to stand in the way of any cost of living relief that the government announces on Tuesday night. And obviously they'll be finalising what they do announce on Thursday after they've seen what's in the government's budget on Tuesday. But yeah, no, there's no way they're going to get in the way of a voter and a bucket of money.
No, indeed. Let's turn to the Solomon Islands. This was another big issue during the week. This framework agreement that the Solomons have struck with Beijing on police and military cooperation, it could see, many analysts believe, a Chinese naval base or other sort of military base in the Solomon Islands. This would dramatically change the regional security balance, and Australia is concerned.
I don't think it's consistent with the values that we share with the Solomon Islands and with Tonga and other countries near neighbours of ours in the region. There's aid that we've provided. There's more that we'll continue to provide support for, many ways in which we work very closely together, and we'll continue to do that. But we want peace and stability in our region. We don't want unsettling influences, and we don't want pressure and exertion that we're seeing from China continue to roll out in the region.
Yeah, so John, what's happened here? How did this come about?
Well, I think this sort of speaks to the China challenge that Australia's facing in its own backyard and is going to continue to over the next years and decades. And China has a lot of power, it has a lot of money, deep pockets, and sometimes these sort of arrangements, as concerning as they are, I think are going to slip through the cracks. Now, the government's tried to press through with its Pacific step up in the region. And that's been pretty successful. It probably arrived a few years late, but they've been doing a whole lot of things like sending 50 police to the Solomon Islands to deal with the civil unrest last year.
That was to help the Prime Minister, Sorabare.
That was meant to offset these kind of arrangements to deter China moving in there, which obviously on this occasion, it's only a draft agreement, so obviously there's a big diplomatic effort now from Australia to push back and try and water it down. But I think occasionally, given China's power and strength, despite Australia's efforts, some of this stuff is going to slip through the cracks, and we've just got to try and do as best we can to be front and centre with our Pacific friends to make sure we're there being considered as well for similar sort of arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, some in Labor have called this a real failure from the government when it comes to what's going on in the Pacific and keeping China at bay. Is it?
Well, I mean, as much as the Prime Minister said the government wasn't blindsided by this, the fact that they were scrambling to verify the accuracy of the documents suggests that there was a failure to know this was coming. And I think it's important to note this hasn't been agreed to yet. It is just a draft negotiating document.
I think, does it have to go through the Parliament?
Well, it's unclear whether it can be waved through without Parliament's endorsement. But, you know, Solomon Islands is facing some of the dilemmas that Australia is facing. I mean, China is its #1 export destination. Sorry, did I say Australia? China is Solomon Islands' number one export destination. There is mixed views within the Solomon Islands government about whether or not they need to, do more with China and accept more assistance from the Chinese government. there's also a suggestion that this is perhaps a way to leverage more support from Australia, and perhaps the leaking of this document will see that eventuate.
Yeah,
but there is a tension there. We know that Solomon Islands shifted their allegiance from Taiwan to Beijing a few years ago. This is happening incrementally, and it's happening throughout the Pacific, and the Australian government is very alert to it.
The government has finally agreed to resettle refugees in Nauru, in New Zealand, those who've been in Nauru primarily, and they've been there for a very long time. This resettlement offer was first made 9 years ago when John Key was in power and Julia Gillard here. Why is it now happening, Shane? Why the change of heart?
Oh, I could be cynical and suggest it's because there's a fair few teal-coloured candidates running in marginal seats, in seats that shouldn't be marginal, which have been labelled the inner-city elites by the government over the last few years, and they've realised, hold on, we actually need those seats. Trent Zimmerman, for instance, in North Sydney. Josh Frydenberg's got his own issues in Kooyong. Tim Wilson in Goldstein. You get into Higgins as well. These issues have been resonating. And so, the fact that it's come out so late, so close to an election, you and we've all been around long enough to know. Well, we know you can't have enough cynicism towards government decisions on occasion.
Well, we know Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison have all argued at various stages against this New Zealand resettlement. They feared it would be a backdoor entry to Australia. It would resume boat arrivals and so on. What role did Jackie Lambie play in this, Sarah?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we know at the time of the Medivac repeal, the repeal of the Medivac legislation, Jackie Lambie said that she had done a deal with government. She couldn't talk about it. She's claimed this week that the deal was to accept the New Zealand offer, which was speculated at the time. The government claims that it was sort of underway in any case, and she was brought into the tent. Jackie suggests there was a secret deal kept in a safe in the Prime Minister's office, which I really hope is true, because it would be a really big safe if it includes all the deals that Scott Morrison has ever done.
Well, this really gets into how the sausage is made, right? How deals are done to get a vote on one issue, and what are you going to give? And she even says she was threatened with jail.
And I mean, the government sort of says that that was just a sort of standard reminder that any discussions at that security clearance are subject to those penalties. But let's not forget that this is a deal that has come after 9 years of people being unnecessarily held in detention, children who have suffered trauma, people who have unnecessarily suffered as a result of the government's refusal to accept this offer, which clearly is not going to provide a backdoor, into Australia, because evidently they can agree to this after all without that
Just
problem.
on that, so, I mean, the government still insists. We heard the Minister, Karen Andrews, saying they won't be able to, even those who are resettling New Zealand, won't be able to permanently settle in Australia. Can they give that sort of assurance? Would that mean two classes of citizen in New Zealand?
It sounds like only once they become a naturalised New Zealand citizen, which is after a period of 5 years. And the government's also saying it wouldn't apply to any new arrivals.
All right. Kimberley Kitching, we saw the funeral on Monday, and really in the days that followed, Anthony Albanese, I think, hardened his position and really started to push back on some of the criticisms that have been made about his Senate leadership team and so on, and about the treatment of Kimberley Kitching. He refuses, it seems, to accept there was any bullying, and he's certainly refusing to hold an inquiry.
In politics, there are a range of people who are involved in party politics who play it pretty hard. One of those was Kimberley Kitching. She was someone who engaged in politics, was passionate about her beliefs, and from time to time that can produce some conflict.
John, politics as usual, in other words. What do you make of the Albanese position here?
Yeah, look, at one level, Labor sort of set the standard that when there's bullying or misconduct allegations raised, they should be believed, we should take them seriously, they should probably be investigated. And there was all sorts of things happening, some of it more unsavoury, but you think about Julia Banks, even Bridget Archer, some of the assertions that were made there in the media and by Labor about potential overstanding, those sort of characters. So it is a little bit hypocritical to sort of wash their hands of this, but I think Albanese does have a point fundamentally. This may be the rough and tumble of politics. I mean, politics is a blood sport, and it's actually often harder with your own side of politics than it is with the opposite side.
Sure.
And Kimberley Kitching, God bless her soul, she played hard, as Albanese said, and you don't get to be a key factional ally of Bill Shorten without knowing how to play the rough and tumble of politics.
I mean, that's true. It is difficult, I think, for those of us, who weren't in the room and all of these things to judge, where the line is on bullying and where it's just normal politics. But Sarah, I mean, there is the issue here. What would an inquiry, how would it work? How would you be able to look into this properly now?
Well, look, I think, as John said, a standard has been set. I don't think it would have been a bad idea for Albanese to have set up some sort of independent inquiry by a party elder or something like that to have a look at the culture. I mean, politics can always do better. That's not to suggest that the rough and tumble of politics contributed to her death. I think what's quite astonishing to people who are not in politics is that these people are so battle-hardened and they play politics so hard, and the factional animosity is so great in the Victorian division that these people are playing politics in the wake of her death. I think that's quite staggering. And I also think it's problematic for Albanese because this is the moment where people are tuning in. And they're looking at Albanese as the alternative Prime Minister. I think that the idea of hypocrisy is one that really resonates with punters, even though this may not be a vote changer.
And do you think he looks hypocritical here?
I think he does a bit, and I think the bigger problem though is it's sort of robbed him of momentum. He has been on a pretty cruisy path, I think, and has kept the criticism very firmly on the government. This is the time, as you're leading into an election campaign where Albanese needs to be making good impressions, and just as voters are starting to tune in, we've got to remember that a lot of people are still not tuned into this contest, and Albanese hasn't defined himself yet, and that is a problem for the Labor Party. Not saying it's too late to do that, but it has sort of, it's been a bump in the road for them, I think, and the timing's not great.
Look, a final one. Hillsong Church founder Brian Houston has resigned after an internal investigation found that he behaved inappropriately towards two women. The Prime Minister was, in response to this, playing down his connection with the pastor.
So very concerned. And the actions that have been taken are entirely appropriate, and I'm sure they will continue down that path as a church. I mean, I haven't been at Hillsong now for over about 15 years. I go to a local church in my own community, a Pentecostal church. I think everybody knows that. I think that I was quite shocked, and I'm sure, like many, very disappointed.
Now, Shane, he hasn't been a member of the Hillsong Church for 15 years, but he was on stage at the Hillsong National Conference with Brian Houston only a few years ago.
With Brian Houston's hand on his shoulder.
Exactly, and he did famously try to get him invited to that gala dinner at the White House some years ago as well.
And that caused problems because he kept saying this was just gossip, just gossip, just gossip, and then he admitted to it, saying, yes, I did. Just weird. The fact that you would forget it was a large conference that he was attending, that he has managed to put that to one side and say, I haven't been to the church. It seemed a real parsing of the relationship.
I mean, the language may have been referring to the fact that he hasn't been a member of the church for that long, for 15 years, but it's clear
they had a relationship.
Yeah, exactly, and it's clear he was, trying to play that down.
Yes, he did, because this hasn't broken widely because it is a fairly narrow issue around Houston and around Hillsong. But again, you're getting into these issues where the Prime Minister has said something which you can say, well, hold on, we've got photographic evidence that it's not true. I think that's part of the problem in just how he's dealing with it.
Yeah, I guess it draws the question too, Sarah, about last election we did see Scott Morrison, bring the cameras into church. Do you think this time we're going to see a similar style from Scott Morrison?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think they see that as an equity in some parts of the country. I mean, it was interesting that demographic breakdown of news poll suggesting that he still has strong currency with Christians. I think the current affair interview shows that that part of Scott Morrison, as much as it's anathema to some people in the population, I think it's the one part of him that people recognise as being heartfelt. So if you've got a problem with your, if your concern is that you don't come across as genuine, and I think that is one element of the Prime Minister's personal life that does come across as genuine. So I don't see why they would, prevent the public seeing that. Yeah. Whether or not they invite them back into church is another question.
Well,
but
it certainly won't be with Brian Houston, I would,
no.
I would guess, between now and the election. All right, our panel, Shane Wright, Sarah Martin and John Keogh, will be back shortly with some final observations. Time now, though, for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with freelance cartoonist and currently the incumbent cartoonist at the Echidna, the election newsletter for the Canberra Times. A very warm welcome, Fiona Katauskas.
Thank you, and ground control to Major Mike. You are looking fantastic and very spacey today.
Well, let's scrape off the Klingons and engage the warp drives and boldly go where no woman's been before, to the galaxy cartoon, into the far reaches, shall we?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go.
The planet might be warming, but the government's still cooling its heels, it seems, on any sort of policy.
Yes, still.
Broken and bleached coral snow dome, the Great Barrier Reef, could be actually a snow doom, couldn't it?
Yeah,
for the once Great Barrier Reef.
I know, but look, Suzanne Lee's not very happy with this. She said it's wrong.
Wrong.
That the reef is completely colourful. So bad one, Matt Gold.
The four horsemen of the climate apocalypse. Lovely Kathy Wilcox. The species extinction, fossil fuel expansion.
Denial, spin. We'll get there in a canter.
The four horsemen of the apocalypse were supposed to be punishment from God, so maybe we need an exorcism or an electrocism.
Ooh, your pun game is really good today.
My pun game's on, isn't it? Did love this. Brian Houston, we have a problem. It's got Scott Morrison here at the Carbon Song Church, at the mega church. Say 3 Hail Barnabys and enjoy your carbon offset.
Yeah, well, they're a broad church, but apparently they're a mega church too.
Terrifying news polls, POLES. You've got news from the North and South poles that are, 30 to 40 degrees above
Celsius,
where they should be.
Yeah,
Celsius.
Yeah, so it's not good. But luckily the Prime Minister is focused on the political science. Political science is in, and it's the only science that matters.
Well, that's right. You're telling me, he says, as he looks at the POLLS.
Yes, that's right. And he's made his position clear on hose holding, so
Yeah.
I have respected his wishes in his cartoon.
Not holding it.
No.
Just, he's hose adjacent.
He is, he is hose adjacent, but there will be no holding going on.
Fiona, Peter Dunn's new defence agency is out of this world. How cool is this? Defence Space Command, the ultimate high ground.
Oh, wow.
In space, no one can hear you scheme. Peter Dutton is a satellite. Wow, you really can see people stuck in floods from up here. Spudnik. Lovely Matt Golding. He's got the head for a rocket, has Peter Dutton, hasn't he?
He has. This has so much going on. This is like the dream Peter Dutton had the night before that inspired him to think up Space Command.
Yuri Spudgarin.
Oh, you've just got to get those spuds in there.
I know, you've got to get those spuds in there everywhere, haven't you? Caffinity and Beyond election. David Pope, perhaps you could scrap the nuke subs for one with warp drive. Arg.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I know, use the fast, Spud.
Yes.
I did love this Peter Dutton in the bath.
Yes.
Fiona, what the hell?
Well, I don't know, he does seem to be the kind of guy who would play soldiers in the bar. We've got him here. Help me, Duts, I'm being spilled. Sorry, ScoMo, but I'm the captain now.
Pete, you still in there?
Yeah.
It makes me want to sing Rabadati, you're the one. David Rowe, just magnificent in its what the hell is going on here.
This is just fantastic. It's in his Politics Now series that he's got, which is, he's managed to tie sport and politics together in
Beautifully,
a wonderful way.
yes. Ash Barty's on TV retiring, and we've got Morrison here, who's got his distinct Hawaiian shirt with the gym sweeper on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's got sort of I've been everywhere. Kirribilli, Cabargo, Lismore.
And here's Josh, who is an actual tennis player.
Oh, yes, Josh is saying, going out at the top of your game, sigh. That's the way to do it. I do love the little details in this. The SFA, which is the Space Force Australia.
Oh,
Space Force Australia,
it's actually
SFA.
Space Command.
To infinity and beyond, Fiona. It's been a great pleasure, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike, and back to you, Spearsy.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let's get some final observations. John, to you first.
So a deal Scott Morrison struck as Treasurer in 2018 to protect Western Australia's GST revenue. It's blown out to cost federal taxpayers $4.4 billion in the coming year. It's become a very expensive promise, and we're all paying for it, and the other states are also not happy about it because a no worse off guarantee that they've got expires in 2026, and they're worried they might miss out after that.
West Australians aren't complaining.
Shane Wright's the architect of it.
Sarah.
OK, back into the history books. The 1922 federal election, after the last time the country endured a pandemic, the nationalist leader Billy Hughes lost his majority, but Labor didn't win enough seats to form a majority in its own right. After negotiations with the Country Party, Billy Hughes was able to form government, but on the condition that he resigned, and that was the deal. So
there you go. Interesting, Shane.
And Billy had 3 or 4 other parties to deal and was member of 3 or 4 different parties. We are all focused on the budget coming on Tuesday night. As soon as the election is called, Treasury starts working what's called PFO, the pre-election fiscal outlook. My understanding is that there will be some differences between what PFO says, what Treasury says, to the budget, which is a much more political document. Some of the things might get knocked down by the boffins inside Treasury.
In terms of forecasts? Mm-hmm. All right, we'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you all very much. A couple of quick plugs before we go. Right after this on the ABC News channel, you can watch Andrew Probyn's full interview with Treasurer Josh Frydenberg ahead of the budget. A little later in the week post-budget, join me for Q&A live from Canberra. We've got a great lineup. It'll be the night of the budget reply. Jim Chalmers will be back, Zali Steggall, Jackie Lambie, Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister, so join us then if you can. Finally, with the election campaign about to formally begin, the Prime Minister gave us a timely reminder of the perils of trying to juggle too many things at once. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.
Hello and welcome to Offsiders. Australia celebrated 2 of its greatest Indigenous athletes this week. First, the world's best female tennis player, Ash Barty, stunned us all when she announced her retirement on Wednesday, aged just 25. And then on Friday night, Lance Franklin became just the 6th man in the history of the AFL to kick 1,000 goals. The milestone had been coming for a long time, but the scenes at the SCG were unlike anything we've ever seen before or likely to see again.
Surely he looks for number 23, got him on short, and he's got it done. He's done it so many times. 999 goals, Buddy Franklin. The legend becomes immortal.
It was bloody brilliant, wasn't it? Goosebump moment. Our panellists this morning, Paul Kennedy, Roy Masters and Samantha Lewis joins us from Sydney. PK, I just can't help thinking of him 8, 9, 10 years ago when he said, I'm moving to Sydney to escape the footy fishbowl. How's that going for him at the moment?
Well, we all laugh. Not only that, but the length of the contract, you know, a 10-year contract. And, Kel, I know that you think this is a contender for the greatest moment in football history. And I sort of scoff at those big statements. But when you present it like that with a bit of music behind it, it was a rare moment, a celebration of a great athlete, a throwback to the time when kids like us were allowed to jump the fence, and every year when someone kicked 100 goals, run out, but that was 10 times better. And a great celebration of a guy who's not nearly finished, maybe. He might finish at the end of the year, but he looks fit and raring to go at a time where all of those other youngsters, teenagers that were drafted along with him, have long since retired. He's still going, a phenomenal athlete.
There was something warmly familiar about both Buddy and all those people running onto the field and the retirement of an athlete so young. It's almost as though the athlete and the fans are reclaiming the sport, because we're so accustomed to the heavy corporate hand on sport. We're so used to athletes being surrounded by minders and by security, and the AFL, you've got to give it some credit for this, because after all, they gave a bit of a wink and a nod to that. We can't approve this, we can't condone it, we can't endorse it, but it'd be lovely to see. And it indeed was lovely to see. And even for an old league man, when the SCG, which is right in the heart of both Roosters territory and Rabbitohs territory, those two clubs were playing out at Homebush. So you've got to say that AFL won Sydney over on Friday night. It's won Sydney over a few times, the AFL. When you consider some of the top 10 moments in AFL, VFL history at the SCG, there's Plugger with his 1,300th goal. There was Plugger after the siren in '96 to get them in the grand final. There was Nick Davis, I see it, but I don't believe it. And now Buddy. Samantha, you live in Sydney. The newspapers fell in love with Buddy the moment he strutted into town, going back 9, 10 years ago. It felt like a real moment of celebration for a city that's been through so much with COVID and then the floods recently as well.
It did, didn't it? I was getting goosebumps watching that package as well. And this morning, going through TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and seeing all the videos that fans took of themselves rushing onto that field, it felt like a release. It felt like such an important moment of togetherness and community, of a reminder of what sport is so good at doing. It's bringing people together in moments of joy, and what a fabulous person to centre that moment around as well. Buddy Franklin, not just a history maker on the field, but also a fantastic ambassador off it. He's a proud First Nations man. He's been incredibly open about his battle with mental health, particularly for men in sport. He represents so much good on and off the field, and this moment for him, like you wouldn't have wanted it to happen to anyone else.
Let's look at it from a broader perspective, Roy.
I love that story about the guy who took his American girlfriend to the SCG for the first time, and she saw these scenes, and he said, "This happens every week." I mean, that American girl, probably waking up this morning expecting kangaroos to hop down George Street.
Well, there are amazing stories right around. I mean, there was a family that had a picnic on the wing, and Isaac Heaney sat down for a little bit. We saw the beautiful scenes with his obviously his wife and his daughter were there, taking his little daughter Tallulah into the rooms. There was Alistair Clarkson wearing a Sydney Swans scarf. I just love that. We know it was a bit of a bitter ending. And then here's the most bizarre. PK.
Yeah, so footage outside there with the Swans, and they didn't know when to go back on. It was a bit of a joke at the end, the last 5 minutes. Someone spread their relatives' ashes on the SCG. I think, we might not see that again. I do think that someone will kick 1,000 goals again, though.
Really?
I disagree with other people. Yeah, I think someone will come along and do it again.
Well, talk us through where he stands in the history of the game, because you've got 5 members of the 400 game club. That's pretty special. Now 6 members of the 1,000 goal club. I reckon if you ask most, I'd rather be in this club. Where's his place in history? Here is the top 6. Of the top 100 leading goal kickers in VFL AFL history, only Paul Salmon at 205 centimetres is taller than Buddy. So his height is what makes him stand out. 200 centimetres, 100 kilograms, can run like the wind.
He might be the best I've seen. I've been thinking about this the last couple of days. He's the best since Lockett as a tall forward, but he's more than a tall forward. He's been chosen as All-Australian at centre-half forward and full forward. And if I can make a cross-code comparison, he reminds me a little bit of Greg Inglis in that he could play any position on the field and be the best player on the field. Have a look at that speed. He's noted as not a great contested mark in that he doesn't take a lot of marks in packs. He doesn't need to. I think he's an underrated mark. I think he's terrific above his head. But if you put a marking defender on him, he's too fast. He's too skillful. He is an unbelievable matchup.
I like a comparison with Greg Inglis. They're both very, very great Indigenous athletes. But Greg, of course, had a lot of injuries throughout his career. That may well reflect the more brutal aspect of rugby league and its tackling. I'm interested in your claim or your prediction that that somebody could kick 1,000 goals, because they're only averaging about 70 goals a year to win the Coleman medal, and so you multiply that by 10, and you're going to have a lot of trouble getting to 1,000.
I think it'll be difficult, and it's difficult for me to back up that prediction. But I always think that we sort of discount anyone being as good or being able to do it. And I just think sometime in the future, if Australian rules survives and is as popular over the next few decades, in 20 years we might see another one who's as good and can kick lots of goals. And of course, the trend of scoring changes all the time. And,
it does.
And it might go back up.
From a personal perspective, I actually moved to Sydney around the same time he did. I'm not a stalker at all. And I had the pleasure of commentating for ABC Radio every home game that he played. And when this is the best live sport I've ever seen, with Buddy strutting at the SCG, the electricity in the air. I would always describe it to people as like going to a rock concert and the band was out and then in comes the swagger of Mick Jagger. He is without doubt the best player I've ever seen live, and I don't think in the Swans' wildest dreams they would ever thought that it would get to this. That he's exceeded all expectations. I mean, I'm an 80s and 90s guy, I guess, and I always thought that Wayne Carey was the man for the moment. Franklin's better than Carey. I think he's better than Gary Ablett Senior by quite some way. So from one star who at 35 years old is not too far from the end to another champion who has suddenly called time. The world #1 and reigning Wimbledon and Australian Open champion Ash Barty stunned us all this week by retiring from tennis. She posted a video on Instagram where she explained her decision.
There's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's just my way. And this is perfect for me. I'll be retiring from tennis. And it's the first time I've actually said it out loud, and it's hard to say, but I'm so happy and I'm so ready, and I just know at the moment in my heart for me as a person, this is right.
Sam, can you imagine what it must feel like to say that you've fulfilled all your wildest dreams at the age of 25 and you're just going to ride off into the sunset, you're going to wet a line, you're going to have a beer, and her desire clearly is to have babies. She's clearly over the travel and the demands that the sport puts upon her. It was a courageous decision.
It was an incredibly brave decision, especially when you consider the fact that sport is really good at creating environments where it's always about the next thing, the next title, the next trophy, the next piece of history, the next record. And you sort of saw that within hours of Barty announcing her retirement. You saw people saying, oh, is she going to go to the AFLW? Is she going to go back to cricket? Is she going to go to golf? It's like, just give her a break, give her a moment, And that retirement video on Instagram, I think, was a really good example of someone who has really reckoned with who they are and what their own personal accomplishments and goals are, and is really content with where she is in her life. I mean, the fact that she's done it at 25, I don't know about you, but I definitely cringed into a singularity, sort of remembering that she's still that age. But it's an incredible moment for an incredible athlete. And the thing that I think people really love about Ash Barty is exactly what you saw in that video, where she says, it's not the right way or the wrong way, but it's my way. She's always really been so true to herself, particularly in the second half of her career. And even going back to when she decided to retire as a teenager, taking a step away for mental health reasons, like that took a really significant amount of self-awareness and wisdom to be able to do something like that. So now to come back in and to do what she's done, and now to get to this point where she's #1 in the world and be like, you know what, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. and that should be enough for us too.
How's this, Roy? She won 25 of her last 27 matches. She hasn't lost a match this year. She won the Australian Open without dropping a set, and to think that she won it with this in the back of her mind. We thought she was under pressure. What about the pressure she's put on herself? And would she have made this decision if she didn't win match point here and claim the Australian Open?
I reckon there was something final about that. Final shot of hers in that Australian Open. It was, you can see the euphoria, the absolute relief. She may well have gone on. I think she wanted to do something for her own country and to win that Grand Slam in Melbourne. You know, the fascinating thing about this is that Serena Williams, at the age of 25, had only won 7, and she went on to win about 23.
Wow.
So Ash, on that same calculation, could probably have won about 12 Grand Slams had she have kept going. And the interesting thing is that there was not a lot of peak rivals about for her. I mean, Osaka's having a few problems and Serena's retired, so...
Hasn't yet retired, but probably will after the US Open, yeah.
But, you know, she's earned $25 million. It's what I tell a lot of footballers, you know. Why are you playing these extra couple of seasons to feed the money into the home units that you're buying all around the country?
Paul, I mean, straight away, Samantha was right, you know, that the comeback, is it on? What will she play? And I've been told, heard a little whisper before she made the announcement, actually, that she wants to go and have babies and she just hates flying and doesn't want to get on a plane again. So you can understand. But straight away, the comeback. This women's tennis is littered with comebacks. Justine Enna was a world number 1. She came back. Clijsters did it a couple of times. Lindsay Davenport, Martina Hingis, Yvonne Goolagong won Wimbledon in 71 and then won again in 80 with her 3-year-old daughter. What are your thoughts on the comeback?
I'm not a betting man. If I were, I'd put my house on her playing tennis again at the top level. I think in a couple of years, I don't even think Ash Barty will understand what it's like in a couple of years. She sits down and watches these major tournaments and thinks, I could go back and win one of those. She loves a campaign. She loves being with her team. For her to win the Australian Open after playing little tennis last year was phenomenal as well. I don't think it was a slam dunk that she was going to retire after the Australian Open. About 4 or 5 weeks ago, I went to a corporate event where she was announcing a new sponsorship deal with an insurance company. She's on billboards with Steph Gilmore all around major cities. I think that this decision's been made in its conclusion only in the last couple of weeks.
I disagree. I reckon that she represents something that we don't see in modern times, which is the 2 or 3 sport athlete. I think she'll get her thrills out of playing golf or even AFLW, as has been suggested. She'll get her kicks. She'll get her athletic joy from other sports.
Finally, Sam, just a final word with you. I know it's about Ash, and we just praise the courage and the bravery in this decision. But is it okay for us to feel sad? Is it okay for us to mourn the decision? Because I'm happy for her, but I'm so sad for the sport and for us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, she is iconic. She was the most watched women's sport event in the history of Australian television. She delivered some of the most memorable and the most emotional moments in the history of sport for us. She was not just a fantastic athlete, but she's a fantastic person. And I think in this sort of age of modern sport where athletes, particularly in solo sports like tennis, are these untouchable celebrities almost. What we love so much about Ash is that she was so much like us. Like that footage earlier of her pumping her fist while holding a beer at the footy, or warming up for the Australian Open by playing backyard cricket against her own tennis bag. You know, she was so deeply human and she was so likeable and she was so much like us. And I think that's why she's going to be missed. Like, yes, she'll be missed because she's a stellar athlete and absolutely elite at what she does. But she'll be missed just because of her personality, her character, her morals and the kind of energy that she brought to professional sport in a time when a lot of athletes of her stature feel like they're further and further out of reach from the rest of us plebeians.
Yeah, well said. OK, Roy, crazy scenes in your sport rugby league last night. Let's start with the Canberra Raiders. They were celebrating Ricky Stuart's 200th game as coach as the Raiders. Messy 12 months. They lost their best player last week to an ACL. 22 points down against the Gold Coast Titans. They launched an almighty comeback to win 24-22.
We're seeing a bit of that in the NRL. They changed the total change at half-time. The NRL have tweaked the rules this year. The game was going too much in the direction of possession with the 6 again rule. They're now awarding these penalties on the first and second tackle for a team stuck in its own quarter, which allows them to get to the other end of the field and start scoring a few tries. It's rebalanced the equation between possession and position on the field. But that game last night between the Storm and Parramatta, that was an absolute cracker of a game. It was very, very high quality.
OK, I know PK's keen to talk about it as a Melbourne Storm man, but Golden Point in Melbourne, I mean, this week in sport has been crazy. So as you mentioned, it was Storm and Parramatta, and this was the final moment. It was Golden Point. Let's have a look. Ray Stone, the unlikely hero, he's done suspected ACL tear, out for a year, scoring the match-winning try. This was an insane finish.
Yeah, well, terrible luck on the knee injury, but I know you've said it's a high-class game, or have they sorted themselves out in your mind yet? And on what you've seen the first few weeks, are these two going to be contenders again, top 6 maybe?
Well, I think the Storm and Parramatta are certainly going to be top 6.
Yeah.
The Storm are very thin on the bench. They've got very small forwards. They've got inexperienced players on the bench. They've had a couple of severe injuries. They also showed a lack of game management there in the last couple of minutes of the match. They should have gone for a field goal. Instead, they shoved the ball wide. So, you know, it's Bellamy has got some work to ensure that they are right in top 2. But they'll be there. And Parramatta are very strong, very big, very disciplined. And they're going to lose a lot of players next year, as the Storm are with the salary cap. So it'll be sort of a bit of a last hurrah season for the Eels.
And Penrith look like they're just back straight into it, a little bit like Melbourne in the AFL, the reigning premier.
Yeah, well, they had quite a few injuries and did win against Newcastle, but nonetheless, Newcastle, through a boneheaded, crazy, idiotic decision, a player was sent off, hitting a guy away from the ball. And they were leading at the time too, so they had a remote chance of staying in there.
All right, well, there's been lots of champagne popping right across Australian sport this week, including the national men's cricket team, which won back-to-back Test series in Pakistan, just 24 years apart. After the first 2 tests ended in draws, Australia did what they couldn't do in the second test, and that's bowl the home side out, led by skipper Pat Cummins and player of the series Usman Khawaja. This Australian team, under those 2 players, Paul, suddenly seemed very likeable.
Yeah, they do. Khawaja's a big part of that. I interviewed Khawaja before Christmas. Of course, he wasn't in the Australian team to start the Ashes, and I asked him what it would be like to go back to the place of his birth and play in Pakistan. He was no certainty at that stage, and he's since been surprised everyone, I guess, and made century after century, player of the series. I've tried to explain to people who don't really watch a lot of Test cricket why I've just sat and gone through 15 days with no promise of a result. In the last hour, it was a series win, but there was no certainty there. It's to do with Pat Cummins, Khawaja, the reception that the Pakistan fans had for the Australian team, but also, I think, critically, as a cricket follower, I'm rapt that the Australian team was able to change the way it played for the conditions. And they play in Sri Lanka in June, and all of a sudden they might be able to win series in Asia.
And they've played in great spirit. I mean, I saw this Warner mimicking a dismissal from one of the Pakistani players, I think, and even that one there from Swepson. I thought, oh no, the arrogance is back. But it's actually, when you watch it in context, they were all sort of taking the mickey out of each other, and it was played in great spirit, Roy.
It was, and of course there seemed to be a degree of pleasure from the crowd, and the crowd and the athletes were sort of enjoying each other's company in the sense that they were honouring Australia for finally coming back after all these years.
There was a comment that you noted from Nathan Lyon that you found interesting in the aftermath.
Yeah, that comment from Nathan Lyon that it's good to have a bowler as the captain of Australia, and the extent to which perhaps as the bowler, the captain, being a bowler, understands the duties of the bowlers and the workload that they're required.
Yeah, and it came after Lyon did what's so difficult to do, and that's bowled a team out on the last day. He took 5 wickets, he praised Cummins, and I think you could see during the test that Cummins obviously understands the pressure of trying to not just throw the ball to the spinner at the last day and say, hey, win us the match. They bowled in partnerships. Cummins was terrific in his captaincy, going between the reverse swinging bowlers and the spinners, including Swepson. So I think Lyon thinks, well, Cummins knows what it's like to be in my shoes, in a way, although they're different bowlers. So, yeah, and he averaged 22 with the ball, Pat Cummins, in those conditions, in those batting conditions. He is a master. And there seems to be a degree of stability now with the assistant coach potentially becoming...
Andrew McDonald.
Becoming the top job. They clearly like him, and some of the turmoil associated with the past is dissipated.
Yeah, I love the theatrics and the goodwill between the two teams. I haven't seen that for a long time when Australia's playing a test match. So many uplifting moments in Australian sport this week. And then there was the Socceroos on Thursday night. Samantha, you were there in Sydney. It was absolutely disastrous. A 2-0 loss to Japan. Automatic qualification is off the table for the World Cup later this year. Talk us through just how terrible this was.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was disastrous. It was, it was kind of the culmination, I think, of a lot of performances of the Socceroos over the course of this World Cup qualification series. Gosh, this series has been going since 2019. That's when this started. But this game really spoke to a lot of the problems that the Socceroos and Australian football more generally has been struggling to deal with over the past decade, really. And a lot of it has got to do with the fact that Graham Arnold, in choosing this particular squad, it was ravaged by injuries, by COVID, by other unavailabilities. And so when he had to go down the roster and try and figure out who was left, what we got was what we saw against Japan at Stadium Australia on Thursday. It was a team that was hodgepodge. It was a team filled with debutantes and older, more fatigued stars. It was a team that had very little understanding of one another, and that also wasn't really set up in a way that maximised their individual talents. It was a shocking performance, and in front of a half-empty stadium of fans as well. It was, overall, the atmosphere was pretty awful. It was a drizzly, terrible Sydney afternoon as well. Like, you couldn't have written a Shakespeare script more depressing than this, really. But it was a game that the Socceroos had to win. And from really the opening whistle, it felt like they weren't out to win it. It felt like they were there not to lose. And I think by virtue of that in particular, that's the kind of football that makes fans turn away. Because Australian national teams, the Socceroos and the Matildas, if they go out and they fight, even if they lose, if they fight, we still love them. But if you have a performance like this, which is sitting back and letting the chips fall as they may and trying to get a goal on the break, not actually playing the kind of football that we like to identify ourselves as a nation, that's the more depressing part of it, I think.
Yeah, and it raises questions, obviously, about Graham Arnold's future. There's a dead rubber on Tuesday night against Saudi Arabia, and then, of course, it's the two elimination playoffs, which we're very familiar with, but it's sudden death. There's no home and away. So Doha, June 7, Doha, June 13, 14 is where Australia's fate will be sealed. Looks like we'll be watching a World Cup for the first time since 2006 without the Socceroos in it. The A-League, on a more positive note, the A-League Women's Grand Final is later this afternoon in Sydney. It's a rematch of last year's Grand Final between Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC. Talk us through your preview. Who's going to win and why?
I hate giving predictions because I always seem to put energy out into the universe that's then turned out to be wrong.
I hear you. I hear you.
Both of these teams, I think, are well in with a chance of taking out this grand final. As you said, it's a rematch of last season's grand final as well, which Melbourne Victory won 1-0 with an Olympico goal in the 120th minute. It was an extraordinary moment after an extraordinary season. But both of these teams are really interesting. Sydney FC and Melbourne Victory, they've had almost polar opposite trajectories over the course of this A-League women's season. Sydney FC won their second consecutive premiership. They were by far the most consistent team over the course of the season. They broke a number of records, including the most clean sheets, the longest number of minutes without conceding a goal, and they have a number of Matildas debutants as well, including Courtney Vine, who was incredibly important in that semi-final win over Melbourne City, as well as Remy Simpson and a number of others. Whereas Melbourne Victory, they have really really gone up and down the roller coaster this season. They started off brilliantly. They were absolutely on fire, but a series of injuries, COVID postponements and other factors off the field had completely derailed their season. They just scraped into fourth, just made the semi-finals, and somehow towards that back end, they clicked. They got the return of Melina Ayres after a season-long hamstring injury back. Alex Chidiac has been absolutely crucial, as you can see here, putting that ball in for the winning goal. She's been incredible for Melbourne Victory as well. So both of these teams are sort of meeting at this collision point of two opposite poles, and it's going to be really fascinating to see which team takes it out. I'm personally very invested in Sydney FC. I think what they represent is exactly what the A-League Women's and really what the A-League Men's needs to be about, which is long-term investment in young players. This is a team that has an average age of just 22, and they've won back-to-back premierships. They're an extraordinary team. But on the other hand, you love the romance of a Melbourne Victory coming from fourth after all the troubles that they've had throughout this season, coming back and clinching that championship. It would be a miracle.
Brilliant preview. I can't wait to sit down and watch it this afternoon. OK. Final tip, observation.
Quick one. In the cricket wrap-up, I know we're focused on the Australian teams today. Babar Azam deserves big hats off. He was a big reason that series was so great. But looking at the basketball today, the Melbourne Boomers are through to the grand final of the WNBL, and the other grand finals will be decided between the Capitals and the Lynx. Perth won up in that series. It's a big shift now for Australian basketball at the moment after the disappointment of the Olympics last year, the post-Cambage era, as they call it.
Yeah.
There's a World Cup in Sydney later this year, and the WNBL continues to be a terrific league and world class. Watch for the end of that, and then looking forward to that World Cup already.
Yeah, women's finals all round. Soccer, basketball and the AFLW today. Collingwood out of isolation. They'll play the Brisbane Lions. Winner into the prelims, which will be played at the MCG one next week, or Adelaide Oval. First ever game at the MCG for AFLW. That is exciting. Roy.
The independent doctor located in the bunker remotely to check on cases of concussion in the NRL, that has caused some debate, even more so after the Newcastle-Penrith game, when a Newcastle player, Kurt Mann, was hit very severely in the groin area, and the remote doctor ordered him off the field as a concussion case, demonstrating yet again, as many people say, that they know the location of men's brains.
Samantha, can you bring some sensibility to this in the final minute?
Oh my gosh. This A-League women's season has been one of the most disrupted and exhausting in recent memory, but there have been a number of really lovely individual storylines throughout it, including the return of Katrina Gorry, who 4 months after having a baby, a beautiful little Harper, returned to professional football with Brisbane Roar, to the point where she almost got called up to the Matildas for the Asian Cup. She's now off to Sweden to continue her charge towards hopefully being selected for next year's Women's World Cup squad as well. So it's a really feel-good story for the end of the season.
Thanks, Sam. Enjoy the grand final. And Roy, you're an idiot. That's the program for the week. It might only be March, but Australia's 3 greatest sporting moments this year have come from 3 fabulous Indigenous role models. Scott Boland in the Ashes, Lance Franklin with that unforgettable milestone we'll never forget, and the universally adored Ash Barty, who's taught us that life as a professional athlete isn't for everyone. She used class, courage and humility, and it was impossible not to love her, even for her opponents. Good luck, Ash. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
I know that the time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams.
Her dream comes true.
I just really admired her for how hard she worked and just how nice she was to everyone. So I kind of wanted to be more like her.
A great player as well as a person, and I always love to share the court with her.
I mean, I cried for 30 minutes actually when she posted that video.
Ash Barty is the Australian Open champion.
Ash, you will be so missed. I don't think there was anyone that I enjoyed getting beat by, but you might be the exception.
Should we hug it out?
We should.
Oh, love you too.
When I think of democracy, I think sausage sizzle.
Sausage.
Well, I think of Greeks, obviously.
Democracy is the moment when the powerless are powerful.
Privilege
is a privilege. We all get to have a say in the future of our country.
To keep streaming on ABC iView, you now need to log in with an ABC account. So log in and save something you want to enjoy later by adding it to your watch list. Pick up where you left off across logged-in devices. Plus, check out recommendations to unearth new shows and movies.
So, when does the show start?
Log in with an ABC account and make ABC iView yours.
Spending to boost economic growth. Live performance.
Women have been great role models.
His family had never lost hope.
Contains the genetic material.
News live from Berlin. U.S. President Joe Biden escalates the rhetoric against Vladimir Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House scrambles to clarify Biden is not calling for regime change in Russia after he lays the blame for the war in Ukraine on the Russian leader. Also coming up on the show, blasts rock the city of Lviv close to the Polish border. Officials say 5 people are injured in multiple rocket strikes on a fuel depot. Ukraine's intelligence chief is warning Russia could be trying to split the country in two. And this 20-year-old is just one of the young Ukrainian soldiers killed in the fight against Ukraine. We meet his family and the village that's mourning him. Hello, I'm Claire Richards, and a very warm welcome to the show. U.S. President Joe Biden has delivered a fiery speech on the war in Ukraine, denouncing Russian President Vladimir Putin. Biden said the West was more united than ever in the face of Putin's aggression, but warned the world to prepare for a long battle. Speaking during a trip to Poland, he stressed the United States' continued support for Ukraine.
A warm welcome for President Biden. His Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, greeted him with full honors. The two have not always seen eye to eye, but came together to stand against Russian aggression. Biden calling the Russian president a butcher.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House was quick to clarify that Biden's comments were unscripted and that the U.S. was not calling for regime change in Russia. In their response, the Kremlin said it was not up to the U.S. but the Russian people to choose their president. Biden's unscripted remarks overshadowed the initial message that NATO is more united than ever before.
Don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory.
Watching Biden's speech from the capital, Kyiv, Ukrainian President Zelensky urged the U.S. and its Western allies to step up their military support, saying Ukraine needed more fighter jets, not more guns. Ukraine cannot shoot down Russian missiles with shotguns and machine guns, of which there are plenty in supply. It's impossible to unblock Mariupol without a sufficient number of tanks, armored vehicles, and especially without fighter jets. But so far, the U.S. has refused to send fighter jets to not antagonize the Russians. Instead, Biden pledged billions more in humanitarian aid and millions more for Ukraine's border guard and police.
And I want to bring in Suda David Wilp, a senior transatlantic fellow with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. A very warm welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time. We just heard in that report Biden promising more aid and support for Ukraine's police. Is that likely to satisfy Ukraine's demands?
Well, Ukraine would really like to have a no-fly zone over its territory, but that's something that NATO doesn't want to do because it doesn't want to get involved in escalating the conflict and being dragged into a war. But I think that the United States and its European allies are doing a tremendous amount in terms of supporting Ukraine, because they realize that the fate of Ukraine determines the fight against autocracy, and also it relates to the preserving peace and stability on the European continent.
Now, are we seeing a change in terms of what the U.S. is willing to provide to Ukraine a month into the war, now that Russia has failed to seize any major city?
The United States has been a supporter, along with Germany and other countries, of Ukraine. Germany has been a financial donor to Ukraine over a number of years, but now it's also stepping up lethal aid to Ukraine. It took a long time, but it's now being delivered, and the United States and other countries are going to look at ways to help Ukraine defend its skies with anti-aircraft weapons, with tank weapons, and also obviously medical supplies and any other items that will help Ukraine defend itself.
And does it seem at this point that a no-fly zone is completely off the table for Washington?
President Biden and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg have been very clear about not imposing a no-fly zone, because they don't want to have direct military contact with Russia. But, you know, I think that Biden's visit to Europe last week really spoke volumes. It shows that the administration is taking alliances very seriously, with meetings with NATO, G7, and the EU, and also solid support for Ukraine. It was quite symbolic that President Biden met with the foreign minister and defense minister of Ukraine over the weekend. And at the end of the day, this visit shows that the U.S. is back, as President Biden said, and that the U.S. is reinforcing its role in the world.
Now, in Warsaw, Biden this weekend called Putin a butcher who cannot remain in power. The White House, of course, walking that back quickly. But do those words alone mark an escalation of sorts in the U.S. approach toward Russia?
President Biden tends to think out loud, but I think Russia will use it for its own disinformation purposes. I don't think he implied that the United States wants it to get into the business of regime change at this moment in time. But I think he spoke the truth in saying that how can the U.S. and its allies fathom having normal relations with Russia when President Putin is at the helm of that country?
And can you tell us a little bit more about what a disinformation campaign using that statement could potentially look like?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, the United States has clearly said that it doesn't want to get involved militarily with with Russia in a military conflict. And I think a regime change would involve, obviously, a military conflict. I think the aim of the United States and its allies is to help Ukraine defend its territorial integrity and its sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. And what does this mean in bigger terms for transatlantic relations generally? I mean, can we see this purely as a reinvigoration of NATO?
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think NATO has really received sort of a new lease on life. It has always been an important military alliance, but it's now more than ever acting as an expression of democratic values in terms of defending the rule of law and freedom. And NATO is doing everything it can to help reassure countries on the eastern flank. It's doubled its battalion groups on the eastern flank. And it's not holding back members in terms of helping Ukraine by sending legal aid to the country.
Okay, Suda David Wilt from the German Marshall Fund, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show. And meanwhile, authorities in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv are assessing the damage after the explosions there on Saturday. Rocket strikes on defense and fuel facilities left 5 people injured. The attacks came despite earlier signals from the Kremlin that it was shifting its focus to the Donbass region in the country's east. It is the 3rd time Russian rockets have hit strategic targets in Lviv. The city had been a haven for displaced people since the invasion began.
People scramble for cover as missiles hit Lviv on Saturday. The region had been largely spared major attacks by Russian forces. The sense of safety in the western city now shattered.
So we were inside the epicenter when rocket just came. So yeah, like after that it was the first time, and after a couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds, second bombing, and everyone left to the shelters.
I said to my friend that Nastya, look at this fire, what it is, and then we heard this sound of the explosion. We tried to hide between the buildings.
When the war broke out in Ukraine, tens of thousands fled to Lviv. It's close to Poland, which is a NATO member. The rocket strikes coincided with U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Poland. Lviv's mayor says the attacks are a message from the Kremlin.
I think with today's strikes, the aggressor wanted to say hello to President Biden, who is now in Poland, with Lviv just 70 kilometers away. I think the entire world must understand that the threat is extremely serious.
People in Lviv must now decide if the city that was once their refuge is safe enough to stay in.
And I'm joined now by DW correspondent Matthias Bullinger from the fairly empty streets of the capital, Kyiv. Matthias, Ukraine on Sunday accused Russia of trying to divide the country into two, akin to North and South Korea. What more can you tell us about this development?
Well, at the basis of this is, of course, the scenario that Russia might now concentrate, that Russia has understood it cannot conquer the whole of Ukraine, and it might now concentrate to consolidate or to make some gains in the east of the country and establish either these self-proclaimed republics there or even incorporate these places into Russia and to permanently control more territory in the east instead of trying to get control over the whole of the country or to somehow have more influence on Ukrainian politics. That's, of course, one of the scenarios. I think the North and South Korea metaphor is something that is meant to illustrate this. We shouldn't take this too literally.
Indeed, Russia signaled already earlier this week that it will focus its efforts on the east of the country. But have we seen evidence of that happening already?
For now, that's hard to say because the east has seen heavy fighting. I mean, the city of Mariupol that we've been reporting on, that has been under siege, that has been almost entirely destroyed, is one of the main centers of that eastern region. And we've also heard a lot of fighting has been going on in other parts of this Donbas region, the two districts of Luhansk and Donetsk. And it's certainly something that is going to continue. This is where Russian forces, of course, have been active since for 8 years now, and this is also where the Ukrainian army has a lot of personnel and a lot of material, and it's definitely one of the hotspots of this war, although it's maybe not the one that we see most in the news because it's hard now to get to some of these places. We are not sure yet whether this has just been some announcement, maybe also a false something that's not going to happen, because we do still see that the Russian troops are, of course, here around Kyiv, and they are in the south, but in these two regions, south and around Kyiv, it seems that the Ukrainian army is on the offensive, and it could very well be that Russia will try to freeze the war in these regions and escalate in Donbas.
And can you tell us a bit more about that, about what the military situation is like in Kyiv, where you are?
Today was exceptionally calm. There were a few explosions heard, a bit of fighting, but not as much as the days before. The front line has basically been in the same places almost since the beginning of the war. That's the northwestern suburbs and in the east, but the Russians have been stalled there for at least 3 weeks, and in the past maybe 4 or 5 days Ukraine has made some gains there, but I am not sure how well they could consolidate these gains. In the east it seems that they have driven the Russian forces quite further away, but they were not as close and as present in the east as they were in the northwest. In the northwest it seems that it's block by block in these suburbs, and we'll have to wait for a few more days until we get clarity on how much and how sustainable the Ukrainian gains in these areas have been.
Matthias, I just want to ask you what the mood is like in Kyiv. I mean, it's been a month since Russia invaded Ukraine. How are people there holding up?
Well, most of the people have left the city, and the streets are have been very empty since the beginning of the war. In the past few days, people seem to have found a way to bring.
Oh, Matthias, I think we've just lost your audio there, I'm afraid. So we are going to leave the interview there. I want to thank you, if you can hear me, so much for joining and your reporting. Please stay safe. Sorry about the technical issues there. Well, after a month of war, many have been surprised at the strength of Ukraine's defense. But the human cost of the conflict remains high, with the number of both military and civilian casualties growing by the day. And amid the destruction, people are having to bury their friends and family in the most difficult of circumstances. DW correspondent Amian Esef sent us this story on a slain soldier from a small village close to the Polish border.
A house fallen silent. He was just 20 years old, hit by Russian artillery on day 3 of the war. It took weeks for his family to learn of his death and bring him home. People from all around came to Dmytro's funeral to honor him.
He was a true Cossack, and he smiled a lot. He was funny, artistic. He always wanted to help everyone. He loved us all so much. He wanted to keep this family together. We'll remember him as an amazing person, an amazing brother.
The Vasyutas are a military family. Dmytro's sister said their father is considered by many a hero of the Donbass conflict. It seemed natural that her brother would choose the same path. Dmytro's schoolhouse. His teacher received the news of his death with a mixture of pain and pride.
We saw each other for the last time on the 12th of February, and he said, "Okay, goodbye, we'll never see each other again." And I said to him, "You can't say that."
I ask if his death has scared any of the young men in the village who may one day have to face the front lines.
Absolutely not. It will give them more courage and strength, maybe even make them angry enough to take on such a responsibility. Nobody is afraid. It's no longer 2014. There's a completely different feeling. In Western Ukraine, we've always seen military service as a responsibility. A duty is a duty.
A lesson instilled at a young age here. Theirs is not to reason why. The cemetery where Dmytro is buried. His grave is visible from a distance, and it seems as if it's the very center of the town. A tragedy, but piled high with flowers.
It's Amian Esef reporting. Now we can take a look at some other developments in the war. Germany is examining the possibility of erecting a missile shield over its entire territory to defend against threats such as those posed by Russia. According to information obtained by the newspaper Bild am Sonntag, Berlin is considering buying the Iron Dome missile defense system from Israel. Museum workers and volunteers are protecting Kyiv's statues and sculptures to preserve the city's heritage. Sandbags and special structures are being placed around the monuments to give them a chance of surviving the war intact. More than 30 need to be protected. Ukraine's deputy prime minister says Ukraine and Russia have agreed to 2 humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians from frontline areas. It includes allowing people to leave by private car from the southern city of Mariupol, which has been devastated by weeks of bombardment. The missile strikes against Lviv are a stark reminder that no place in Ukraine is safe from Russian attacks. In cities across the country, civilians have volunteered to join the fight and form a last line of defense. And although the front may be far from Lviv, people there are now picking up arms and preparing to defend themselves from Russian troops.
This group of Ukrainian civilians have come to learn how to defend themselves against a Russian attack. Uliana is 27. She's a project manager in a food company and has come here with her boyfriend. She's getting a day-long crash course on how to defend herself, her family, and her home. Our first task is to learn how to get people out of red and yellow danger zones, so we can at least save some lives. And then, for the first time ever, they're holding a Kalashnikov. As armed civilian volunteers, they're trained to form the last line of defense. Uliana is learning how to empty a magazine and reload it with cartridges.
I've never done anything like this before. And I didn't think I ever would. But now I have to. The war has forced us all to think about how to save our own lives. This isn't as easy as it looks in the movies. You really have to understand how a gun works before you pick it up.
Load, cock, release the safety, aim, and pull the trigger. Uliana says yes, she would do that. Until recently, she could never imagine killing anyone. But now she says she's willing. Because what is happening in her homeland is horrific and senseless, she says. At first, she tried to understand why Vladimir Putin was invading Ukraine. Now, she no longer cares.
I'm done, because we cannot understand those people, and I really hope they will stop trying to understand them. We want the peace, we want them to leave our country, we want them to do whatever they want, but not, with Ukraine.
More than 1,000 volunteers have attended training sessions like this one since the war began. A day is all they get. They want to be prepared, at least a little, in case the war reaches Lviv.
And let's bring you up to speed now with some of the other stories we are following for you at this hour. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been meeting Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in Jerusalem to discuss reviving a 2015 international agreement to control Iran's nuclear ambitions. Israel fiercely opposed the initial accord, which promised Iran sanctions relief in return for curbs on its nuclear program. Women's rights activists in Afghanistan have called for nationwide protests if the Taliban fail to reopen girls' secondary schools within a week. Thousands of girls returned to classes on Wednesday after the Taliban reopened schools for the first time since seizing power last August. But just hours later, the hardline Islamists closed girls' schools again. And the second black box from the crashed China Eastern Airlines passenger plane has been recovered. The Boeing 737 came down last Monday, killing all 132 on board. Searchers had spent days scouring for the flight data recorder, which should now help investigators determine what caused the plane to crash. Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have announced a 3-day truce with the Saudi-led coalition. This comes days after the rebels launched drone and missile attacks on Saudi Arabia. One of those missiles had hit a location near the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix race route in Jeddah. But that race did go ahead as planned. Red Bull's Sergio Perez took a career-first pole position ahead of Sunday's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, the Mexican prevailed after a qualifying session plagued with accidents. German Mick Schumacher had a horrendous-looking crash during the second phase. He had to be airlifted to hospital. But apparently, luckily, he suffered no injuries. The qualifying was suspended for about an hour as a result, and Schumacher's car was completely destroyed. And the film industry is still struggling to rebound from the coronavirus pandemic. But despite heavy economic setbacks, Tinseltown is in the mood to party. The 94th Annual Academy Awards are upon us, and Hollywood is getting ready for its biggest night of the year. After a scaled-back ceremony in 2021, the Oscars are back at the legendary Dolby Theater in Los Angeles. But lovers of the big screen might be in for some disappointment, as streaming services are expected to win big across the board.
It's almost showtime. The final preparations are underway. The red carpet is rolled out, and the famous gold statues stand tall. A night of glamour and prestige is to be expected for the first fully in-person Oscars since 2020. The pandemic has played a role for many of Hollywood's finest. Actor and director Kenneth Branagh says that the coronavirus era impacted his direction of Belfast, for which he has been nominated for Best Director.
One became very aware of what you regarded as precious, things that you might have taken for granted suddenly took on a terrific importance. So this story is particularly with the chance of seeing it through a child's eyes, a 9-year-old's. I thought maybe there's something that can be understood about this by telling this story now.
One of the top contenders for Best Picture is The Power of the Dog, featuring Benedict Cumberbatch and directed by Jane Campion.
Only another myth.
Will Smith is a likely candidate for the Best Actor award for his performance in King Richard, where he plays the father of tennis stars Serena and Venus Williams.
Dangerous creature on this whole earth. It's a woman who knows how to think. You gonna show them how dangerous you are?
The animated film Flea is up for an unusual hat-trick of Best Documentary Feature, Best Animated Feature and Best International Film. It's a Danish production about a gay Afghan man that hopes to humanise the refugee experience. The evening will be hosted by Regina Hall, Amy Schumer and Wanda Sykes, entertaining movie lovers across the globe as they sit on the edge of their seats for Hollywood's biggest night of the year.
And the Oscar goes to... You're watching DW News. Let's get a recap of our main story. White House officials are trying to walk back U.S. President Joe Biden's harsh words against Russia's Vladimir Putin. Speaking in Poland, Biden said Putin, quote, cannot remain in power. But U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Biden was not calling for regime change. There's your news update at this hour. Don't forget, you can always keep up to date on our website. That's dw.com. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. For me and the team, thanks so much for joining us.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma. If you had a deep fake video of you, are we going to the tapes?
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Basketball's best are booming to the finals. Stream every electrifying play live on ABC iView.
What a statement.
The WNBL Finals. Stream all finals live on ABC iView.
Economic growth family had never lost a live performance.
This town has just lurched from one disaster to another.
Having your house burned down works really well. You get rid of everything. It's like a big clean out.
Malakuta needs to advocate for what we want.
We feel we know best about what we need.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies.
We are having a Malakuta election.
There'll be no chance that they'll choose me.
The opportunity is now to build back better.
People's Republic of Malakuta starts April 5 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Father, I've a case for you.
A case?
Here we go again.
Suspicious in itself, if you ask me.
It means it's murder. And you are a man that believes in justice, are you not? Don't pick a fight with a man holding a meat cleaver.
You should listen to the good father.
The new season of Father Brown.
Something has been taken. A plate of my scones. I'll get them to Scotland Yard immediately.
Saturday 7:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
I've covered more than 80 elections for the ABC over the last 3 decades.
Doesn't get better than Anthony Green, one of my favourite colleagues.
Anthony Green is extraordinary. I've never seen anyone like him.
He is absolutely unbelievable.
His capacity to understand numbers as they're coming in and explain them.
All of the politicians, from Prime Minister to Opposition Leader, waits for Anthony Green to call it. An amazing asset to our election coverage.
And I'm quite happy to continue to do it for a few more years yet.
To keep streaming on ABC iView, you now need to log in with an ABC account. So log in and save something you want to enjoy later by adding it to your watch list. Pick up where you left off across logged-in devices. Plus, check out recommendations to unearth new shows and movies.
So, when does the show start?
Log in with an ABC account and make ABC iView yours.
The glitz, the glamour, the sparkles. Mardi Gras is coming to the ABC.
What a thrill it is to be engaging with art.
It's about equality. We're there to play the same game.
No matter where you live in this big, beautiful country, we're here for you.
Travelling the roads that connect communities.
All over Australia. Connecting with you in 2022.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs.
Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Snap, we got to stop running the business out the back of my van.
Not sustainable. I've sustained you so far.
We're on the edge of being a proper business.
We could be talking about the waves.
What are you doing?
We're selling an idea of summers that never end.
When I'm out there, just me and the ocean.
Trace and I, we're building a future. The company is called Lightwave, and we're making board shorts.
What about loyalty? What about friendship?
Well, this is war.
Don't worry, it's okay. Lightwave shorts. I'll be coming home to see you today.
Lightwave victory.
The Bedford is my company.
Snap is building an empire.
Wait, this isn't what I came for.
Show them who you really are.
I'm coming home, I'm coming home, I'm coming home to you tonight.
When did all this stop being fun?
Barons starts April 24 on ABC or log into ABC iView.
Day after day, the Ukrainian port of Mariupol has withstood Russia's relentless onslaught and refused to surrender. But the city is all but destroyed. Many have left. Supplies of basic goods are running out fast. Is this how Russia plans to strangle other cities across Ukraine? My guest this week is Markian Lubkivsky, advisor to the country's Minister of Defense. How long can this all go on?
Till the last Ukrainian will be killed. And this is not only nice words. So the moral and the spirit of Ukrainians is very high.
As the fighting intensifies, we look at the narrow path to a peace accord and the prospect that Ukraine faces years of stalemate. What motivates people enduring such dire conditions? And while they give their life and their future for their country, do they feel that their allies who promised so much have given enough? All that and much more on Conflict Zone. Markian Lubkivsky, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me with you.
As Russia steps up its attacks, fighting words from your president, Ukraine, he said, will never bow to Russian ultimatums. And he made clear there'd be no compromises on territorial integrity or sovereignty. But he wants to talk to Mr. Putin. Is there anything to suggest that Russia wants to talk constructively to him?
Thank you, Tim. This initiative was raised a couple of times by President Zelensky. And he is ready to speak to President Putin to discuss all issues, including military, humanitarian, political. But we still did not get any reply from the Russian side that Russian side is ready to discuss that. Let me remind you one very interesting thing for me as a diplomat. You remember recently were negotiations between Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, and his counterpart, Minister Lavrov. And after that negotiations, there was a statement made by Lavrov. He said that Russia will never attack any European or other European country. And after that, he added, and Russia never attacked Ukraine.
So even if you got a deal, you wouldn't trust it? Is that what you're saying?
We need to have very strong guarantees provided not only by Russia, but also by such countries as the United States, United Kingdom, G7, European countries, EU, and probably our neighbors.
You had those guarantees, or some of those guarantees, with the Budapest Memorandum going back to 1994, guaranteeing your security in return for you giving up your nuclear weapons. That didn't work so well then, did it? What makes you think it would work better now?
We need to establish new system of security. You're absolutely right saying that Budapest Memorandum never worked. And now we need to include all parties and to find such guarantees which should be really workable for everybody, not only for Ukraine. Because in these circumstances, nobody can be safe. Look, today Putin attacked Ukraine. Why tomorrow he wouldn't attack Poland or Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia? Nobody can be sure right now.
A week ago, your president's top negotiator, Mikhailo Podolyak, went so far as to say the Russian position had softened significantly. We have much confidence, he said, that we'll have a ceasefire in the coming days. What happened to that confidence?
I think that there are two reasons. So I cannot disclose the matter of negotiations. I'm not the part of negotiating team. But there are two main reasons why position or approach of Russian Federation became much more softer. First of all, the losses of Russia in Ukraine are tremendous. The Russians lost already 15,000 their soldiers here. And the second thing, that sanctions are working. So these two reasons are the base or the matter why Russians are ready to speak in a much more softer way.
But there's some suggestion in the West that Russia sees negotiations not as a way to end conflict, but as part of that conflict. As one diplomat said, just a way of dialing up and dialing down the tempo to suit Russia's needs. What do you think?
We don't want to face with a frozen conflict. You are absolutely right. I agree with you. So, and this is the strategy or the tactics of Russia. Russia made a couple of frozen conflicts on the territory of Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Moldova. So, and probably if they will not succeed in the coming days, and they will not, they will try to frozen the conflict.
You say you don't want a frozen conflict, but how long can you go on like this with critical shortages of food, water and medicine in the main areas under attack, tens of thousands of people homeless, people sleeping in basements, people dying on the streets? How long can this last?
Till the last Ukrainian will be killed. And this is not only nice words. So the moral and the spirit of Ukrainians is very high. And the spirit and the experience and effectiveness of Ukrainian army as well. So we will fight till the end. The situation is really very dramatic if we are speaking about such cities as Mariupol, as Chernihiv, and then Kharkiv. So I got an impression that Putin is going to demolish Ukraine totally and to kill all Ukrainians. So looks like this is his strategy and this is his main goal. But we will fight till the end.
In the US, President Biden has been warning that Russia could use chemical and biological weapons. How seriously do you take that threat?
Very seriously. First, there were accusations regarding Ukraine that Ukraine will use these chemical weapons, that we are working on birds taking the biological weapons to Russia or munition. This is crazy. So we should be ready. Everybody should be ready. And don't forget that Russia is one of nuclear powers. So they can use also nuclear weapons. And this is terrible. So you remember that a couple of days ago, Zaporizhia nuclear station was attacked with the Russian missiles. So that's why we are ready for any kind of scenarios.
In the last 72 hours, your forces admitted they'd lost access to the Sea of Azov, that strip of coastline that connects Crimea to the breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. How serious is that loss for you?
Situation in Mariupol is very serious, Steve. So that's why we are trying to take care and to rescue our people. So the spirit of people defending, soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers defending Mariupol is very high. So again, they will fight till the end. So the main thing for us is to establish so-called humanitarian corridors and take people out from the areas which are under attacks. Unfortunately, Russians are shooting on our people. They are trying to kill everybody who is leaving Mariupol, Chernihiv, or some other cities. This is terrible.
Reports from Mariupol have spoken about how it's almost completely destroyed. Is it close to the end? Is it close to the point where it simply cannot take any more?
90% of the infrastructure of Mariupol is demolished. So this is our new Aleppo. So I don't want to do any forecasting. It's very hard for me, but we will fight. It's tremendously hard to accept that, but we are trying to do our best, and our soldiers are real heroes there.
Mr. Lubkivsky, if proper talks began, constructive talks with the Russians began, how far is your government united on what it will or won't negotiate to get a deal?
It's very important. Our government is united, you know that. And together with the parliament, and the president is staying in Kyiv. As you know, he will not escape. And I think it's important to speak to Ukrainian people. And the president will do that. So in case he will face with the issues he cannot solve himself. So I think that our society is united, maybe for the first time in our new history. So it's important to keep it united. And the main things so far, it is ceasefire and to establish mentioned humanitarian corridors.
Your president spelled out, as we said, his red lines about territorial integrity and sovereignty. So you would never accept the annexation of Crimea. Is that also a red line?
Yes, sure. Annexation of Crimea was illegal, was made in a military way, so that cannot be accepted. Same to territories or temporary occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So, but it's important to sit and to speak. We are ready for such kind of negotiations. For your information, negotiations are ongoing. Our diplomats are speaking to Russians right now.
If those red lines are standing, what's left? Some kind of negotiated neutrality for Ukraine?
You know that our aspiration is to become the part of a civilized world, to the part of NATO and European Union. I think it is very important to be focused on the way to become member of European Union. And that perspective is very clear. So I think that we have to go in that way and to discuss the status of Ukraine with the guarantees by countries like United States, United Kingdom. So I think this is the way how we can move ahead.
But you have now accepted that you will not join NATO. President Zelensky has called Ukraine's failure to gain membership a truth that must be recognized. Does the country accept that now? Do you accept that?
The point that Ukraine is going to become the member of NATO was put into Ukrainian main law, into constitution. So in case that decision will be on the table, and now it's not on the table, we have to change the constitution from one side. And the main thing, I strongly believe that President Zelensky, in any case, will speak to his people.
You're talking about a referendum then? Because he's actually spoken about a referendum.
Correct, absolutely. So the statement was made yesterday and today morning that we probably will use referendums as a mechanism to establish the real situation and to speak to Ukrainians.
Mr. Lubkivsky, it seems as though there's a very narrow path to an agreement and a very high price for failure. The odds of you finding that path aren't very encouraging, are they?
Yeah. So, but this is our way, this is our destiny. You know, I'm absolutely confident that we need to win or to you know, or so this is for us something this is historical moment for Ukraine. We have a lot to do in terms of internal life to change a lot of things, but we want to become the part of Europe. I think that it's clear to everybody that Ukraine now is defending European values. And this is very important for our partners to understand and to let Ukraine join European, Euro-Atlantic community.
While you talk about your relations with the Euro-Atlantic community, you didn't get the no-fly zone that you wanted, but you have had significant amounts of lethal military aid from the West. Do you still feel in any way that the West has let you down?
No. We are very grateful to all our partners, to all our friends. We are grateful to our neighbor Poland, our strategic partner. And we never got the non-flying zone, but we are in very good cooperation with all our partners to provide Ukraine with the weapons. We need at this stage, still need aircrafts and anti-air systems. So that was the point discussed by my Minister of Defense, Mr. Oleksiy Reznikov, yesterday with his British colleague and Polish Minister of Defense.
But more weapons are on their way, kamikaze drones, hundreds of Stinger missiles, also different hardware from Italy, Denmark, Germany and other EU forces. You're happy with the response you got?
Yes, we are.
Your president, though, seemed particularly annoyed by what he saw as an inadequate response from Israel. Is that true? He used some pretty strong words about them.
Yeah, it was a statement to Knesset, and in his statement, President Zelensky was very clear. But from the other side, to make you know, our relations with Israel are very close. Thousands of Ukrainians live there, and Ukraine is the homeland for a lot of Israeli people. So, and that's why his statement, his address was very emotional, because Ukrainian president is Jewish. So that's why we really expect from Israel, as well as from other countries like India, to make very strong and very clear statements related to Russian aggression. But from the other side, we cannot accuse any country, you know, that they are providing us with the weapons or with the support or not. No, we are grateful for everybody, but everybody should find a way how to help Ukraine.
You're surrounded by death, destruction, misery in your country. What's been the worst moment for you personally in the last month?
It was a death of a very close friend of mine. I cannot disclose his name. He's a real fighter. But that was the tragedy for, first of all, for his family and for me personally, because I knew that person.
How hard is it to carry on after something like that?
I don't know. I don't know. It's impossible. You know, every death for me, it's like shoot into my heart. It's not easy to overcome all these things. I'm quite strong person, and I have a lot of experience based on my Balkan career. I mean, I spent in total almost 10 years working in the former Yugoslavia and then in Croatia. I used to be ambassador to that country, to Croatia. So it's not easy, but something like that happened to me already. It was in 1999. Then I spent 78 days in Belgrade during NATO campaign against the regime of Slobodan Milosevic. But that was not my country. But I know what is the war, and now war came back to me again.
You talked earlier about the newfound unity in Ukraine. Is it the collective war effort that motivates people now?
Yeah, you know that. You know what was the idea of Putin? He came to Ukraine with the idea to kill, to make free Ukraine from fascists. But he is the real fascist, together with his army and with his leadership. I met a lot of people coming from Kharkiv, from Sumy, from Chernigiv, where they were trying to leave their places and to move to the western part of Ukraine. And they were asking me with only one question. We are half Russians, we speak Russian, we are fascists. A lot of Jews approached me with the same question. So Putin accused that people, that they are fascists. They're not fascists, they're Ukrainians, they love their country, and they will stay till the end. So this is the main mistake, I think, made by Russian intelligence. I think that Putin's dream was to reach Kyiv and to have parade here like in 3-4 days, and that never happened.
Another mistake may have been to underestimate the morale of the Ukrainian people. The polls have been charting, the opinion polls have been charting that mood. Have you been surprised at how upbeat some of them have been? The rating agency did a telephone poll of 1,200 people across Ukraine last week. 91% said they felt hope when thinking about the situation in the country. Is that really credible, do you think?
You see, the moral and the spirit of Ukrainians is very high. People are very well motivated. You know, from one side, they are trying to escape and they are looking for the safe places. But from the other side, I think the support and the belief into our victory is very high. I'm very proud to be Ukrainian. I'm very proud to be the part of these people.
Your president has spoken of a strategy for what he called national resilience, designed to deal, I think, with different scenarios like a full-on invasion. How detailed is that strategy, and has it helped to give people confidence, do you think?
I think it's too far to speak in details about strategy. President is sending to everybody very clear and very strong messages. Stay brave. Ukrainian army will defend you. And I think that now the main scenario or the main thing is to protect Kyiv and other cities. So as you know, Russians did not succeed taking into surrender Ukrainian cities. Maybe the exclusion is Mariupol, but the rest of the cities are fighting, and the moral and the spirit of people is and army is very high.
Your president also had an unusual phrase. He said, we are on the brink of surviving this war. I think he said that a few hours ago, on the brink of surviving this war. Does that mean that you'll be able to force a stalemate? And is that, at the moment, the best you can hope for?
I think so. I'm absolutely, I agree with my president. And I think that he was very clear in his words.
Do you have any confidence that China could play any mediating role with Russia? Because that's something else that people have suggested. Or is China only interested in itself and the chance to join a new anti-Western alliance? What do you think?
I think so. I think that China should not interfere into this war on the Russian side. So it's the role of China should and could be tremendous. You remember that President Biden sent very strong messages together with his the advisor Sullivan, very strong messages to China. But yes, I think so. Now, as we can see, China is apart from this war. But I think that the role of China might be significant.
As this conflict goes on, do you also have your idea, your thoughts and your concentration on international justice? Is this something you're thinking of? Are you documenting the potential war crimes that are taking place? Are you working with the International Criminal Court, the chief prosecutor, who's also expressed interest in putting together evidence and building winnable case on war crimes, if that's possible in the future? How important is that idea of international justice to you?
We possess a lot of facts, a lot of documents, a lot of evidences that can prove that Russia and her president, they are the criminals. So we are going to the International Criminal Court. We established already good cooperation with them. So investigation is ongoing, and we already provided, and we are going to provide a lot of evidences to that institution. One more interesting thing is that how we can negotiate, how we can make an agreement with the world, with the international criminal. It's also the question we need to find the answer.
Do you think you'll ever get your old life back again, Mr. Lubkivsky, or is it inevitable that you'll have to build a new kind of life full of uncertainty and insecurity?
Yes, I believe in that. You know, in 2012, I used to be the tournament director for most successful tournament in the history of UEFA, Euro 2012. I was leading the office representing UEFA in Ukraine, and we did tremendous job. That was the biggest and the most successful project in my life, I believe. I want to come back to my usual life, to see my wife, my kids. This is normal. I think this is the will of all Ukrainians who left their homes.
Markian Lubkivsky, it's been good to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me with you.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView. Australia's roadmap to recovery. What the make or break budget means for the government, the country and for you. From 7:30, the Treasurer's speech, then all the interviews and expert analysis in the ABC News Budget Special. Budget Night 2022, Tuesday, ABC TV, iView, radio and online.
Next time on Artworks, we're coming to you from the Lawn Sculpture Biennale.
For me, the journey of life is one that leaves a mark, and the sea speaks very strongly to me of that.
We also explore the Sydney Biennale.
Artworks, Wednesday at 8 on ABC iView and TV+.
Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150? Would the world be better without lies? No.
If you had a deep fake video of you, are we going to the tape?
Well, if there are thousands of gods, how do you know you've chosen the right one?
You want me to answer that in a light entertainment format?
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Quite serious situation that we're worried about in our listener area.
Get the latest information and updates from your local region.
We have issued an emergency warning.
What can I do? Know your frequency and stay connected with ABC Radio, your emergency broadcaster.
News live from Berlin. U.S. President Joe Biden ramps up the rhetoric against Russia's Vladimir Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House scrambles to clarify Biden is not calling for regime change, as Ukraine warns that Russia could be trying to divide the country in two. Also coming up on the show, a 20-year-old Ukrainian soldier, one of the many young people killed in the fight against Russia. We meet his family and the village mourning him. And a milestone meeting. Arab, Israeli, and U.S. diplomats gather for a special summit. Efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal are expected to dominate the agenda. Hello, I'm Claire Richards, and a very warm welcome to the show. U.S. President Joe Biden has delivered a fiery speech on the war in Ukraine, denouncing Russian President Vladimir Putin. Biden said the West was more united than ever in the face of Putin's aggression, but warned the world to prepare for a long battle. Now, speaking during a trip to Poland, he stressed the United States' continued support for Ukraine.
A warm welcome for President Biden. His Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, greeted him with full honors. The two have not always seen eye to eye, but came together to stand against Russian aggression. Biden calling the Russian president a butcher.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House was quick to clarify that Biden's comments were unscripted and that the U.S. was not calling for regime change in Russia. In their response, the Kremlin said it was not up to the U.S. but the Russian people to choose their president. Biden's unscripted remarks overshadowed the initial message that NATO is more united than ever before.
Don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory.
Watching Biden's speech from the capital, Kyiv, Ukrainian President Zelensky urged the U.S. and its Western allies to step up their military support, saying Ukraine needed more fighter jets, not more guns. Ukraine cannot shoot down Russian missiles with shotguns and machine guns, of which there are plenty in supply. It's impossible to unblock Mariupol without a sufficient number of tanks, armored vehicles, and especially without fighter jets. But so far, the U.S. has refused to send fighter jets to not antagonize the Russians. Instead, Biden pledged billions more in humanitarian aid and millions more for Ukraine's border guard and police.
I want to bring in Suda David Wilp, a senior transatlantic fellow with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. A very warm welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time. We just heard in that report Biden promising more aid and support for Ukraine's police. Is that likely to satisfy Ukraine's demands?
Well, Ukraine would really like to have a no-fly zone over its territory, but that's something that NATO doesn't want to do because it doesn't want to get involved in escalating the conflict and being dragged into a war. But I think that the United States and its European allies are doing a tremendous amount in terms of supporting Ukraine because they realize that the fate of Ukraine determines the fight against autocracy, and also it relates to the preserving peace and stability on the European continent.
Now, are we seeing a change in terms of what the U.S. is willing to provide to Ukraine a month into the war now that Russia has failed to seize any major city?
The United States has been a supporter, along with Germany and other countries, of Ukraine. Germany has been a financial donor to Ukraine over a number of years, but now it's also stepping up lethal aid to Ukraine. It took a long time, but it's now being delivered, and the United States and other countries are going to look at ways to help Ukraine defend its skies with anti-aircraft weapons, with tank weapons, and also obviously medical supplies and any other items that will help Ukraine defend itself.
And does it seem at this point that a no-fly zone is completely off the table for Washington?
President Biden and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg have been very clear about not imposing a no-fly zone because they don't want to have direct military contact with Russia. But, you know, I think that Biden's visit to Europe last week really spoke volumes. It shows that the administration is taking alliances very seriously, with meetings with NATO, G7, and the EU, and also solid support for Ukraine. It was quite symbolic that President Biden met with the foreign minister and defense minister of Ukraine over the weekend. And at the end of the day, this visit shows that the U.S. is back, as President Biden said, and that the U.S. is reinforcing its role in the world.
Now, in Warsaw, Biden this weekend called Putin a butcher who cannot remain in power. The White House, of course, walking that back quickly. But do those words alone mark an escalation of sorts in the U.S. approach toward Russia?
President Biden tends to think out loud, but I think Russia will use it for its own disinformation purposes. I don't think he implied that the United States wants it to get into the business of regime change at this moment in time. But I think he spoke the truth in saying that how can the U.S. and its allies fathom having normal relations with Russia when President Putin is at the helm of that country?
And can you tell us a little bit more about what a disinformation campaign using that statement could potentially look like?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, the United States has clearly said that it doesn't want to get involved militarily with with Russia in a military conflict. And I think a regime change would involve, obviously, a military conflict. I think the aim of the United States and its allies is to help Ukraine defend its territorial integrity and its sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. And what does this mean in bigger terms for transatlantic relations generally? I mean, can we see this purely as a reinvigoration of NATO?
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think NATO has really received sort of a new lease on life. It has always been an important military alliance, but it's now more than ever acting as an expression of democratic values in terms of defending the rule of law and freedom. And NATO is doing everything it can to help reassure countries on the eastern flank. It's doubled its battalion groups on the eastern flank. And it's not holding back members in terms of helping Ukraine by sending lethal aid to the country.
Okay, Suda David Wilp from the German Marshall Fund. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show. And authorities in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv are assessing the damage after the explosions there on Saturday. Rocket strikes on defense and fuel facilities left 5 people injured. The attacks came despite earlier signals from the Kremlin that it was shifting its focus to the Donbas region in the country's east. It is the 3rd time Russian rockets have hit strategic targets in Lviv. The city has been a haven for displaced people since the invasion began.
People scramble for cover as missiles hit Lviv on Saturday. The region had been largely spared major attacks by Russian forces. The sense of safety in the western city now shattered.
So we were inside the epicenter when rocket just came. So yeah, like after that it was the first time, and after a couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds, second bombing, and everyone left to the shelters.
I said to my friend that Nastya, look at this fire, what it is, and then we heard this sound of the explosion. We tried to hide between the buildings.
When the war broke out in Ukraine, tens of thousands fled to Lviv. It's close to Poland, which is a NATO member. The rocket strikes coincided with U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Poland. Lviv's mayor says the attacks are a message from the Kremlin.
I think with today's strikes, the aggressor wanted to say hello to President Biden, who is now in Poland, with Lviv just 70 kilometers away. I think the entire world must understand that the threat is extremely serious.
People in Lviv must now decide if the city that was once their refuge is safe enough to stay in.
And I'm joined now by DW correspondent Matthias Bollinger reporting for us from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Matthias, Kyiv says a new round of talks with Russia is set to start on Monday in Turkey. What more can you tell us about that meeting?
Yeah, these talks have been going on almost since the beginning of the war, but it's clear at the moment that we are not talking about any solution to the conflict, but it's careful understanding if any of the positions have shifted, whether any compromise might be possible in the future, and what can be done on the ground now in talking about humanitarian corridors, etc. So it's not that every time a world leader like Erdogan says, oh, that you could talk together, that we see a prospect for peace.
And ahead of those talks, Ukraine on Sunday accused Russia of trying to divide the country into two, akin to North and South Korea. What more can you tell us about that?
This seems to refer to what Russia has said, the shift in strategy, where they try to gain as much territory in the east, in the Donbas especially, which they, as they call it in Russia, want to liberate and hold to these territories while giving up the goals of getting deeper into Ukraine, into the heartland of Ukraine, or getting control of Kiev or other important parts of the country, or even of installing a puppet government here in Ukraine. So they seem to be understanding that these goals would be extremely difficult to achieve, if at all, and force and concentrate their forces on the east, which then is the idea they would control as either as separate republics like they do now with a bigger territory, or incorporate into Russia, and this is what this refers to. Don't take this Korea analogy too literally. It means that one part of the country will be controlled by Russia and the other part will not.
And with Russia signaling it is looking east, a separatist leader in Luhansk has said his region wants to hold a referendum on joining Russia. What is going on there?
Well, we don't really know a lot about what's going on the ground there. I mean, for years, journalists have not been allowed to enter these territories, and now with the military being active there, with more Russian troops having been brought in, and with fighting intensified in Donbass. We shouldn't forget that this is one of the regions where fighting has been most intense during all that time, and where both sides have quite a lot of military personnel and also equipment. And in this region, of course, we don't know what's going on the ground, but this might be a signal for the further Russian strategy, again in line with what Russia has said: concentrate on Donbass, liberate it, as they call it. That means bring it under control, and then in the long term it might be incorporated into Russia, or it might exist as a separate self-proclaimed republic. I wouldn't think that anybody can hold a referendum at this moment in any of these territories while the fighting is as intense as it is.
Matthias, you're joining us from the capital, Kyiv. Can you tell us how defenses there are holding up?
Well, what we've heard in the past few days is that Ukrainian forces have gained territory around the capital. We still have basically the same situation as in the very first, after a few days of the war, when Russia had troops being positioned in the northwest, in the suburb called Irpin, that has become quite well known around the world due to these harrowing pictures of refugees fleeing out of this town. And there are troops in the east. In the east, they were never as close to the city, but still they were advancing. Now the Ukrainian forces seem to have driven them back in the east, and there's fighting going around in Irpin, and Ukraine seems to have gained some control back over some of these areas, but it seems that it's a tense situation, and I am not sure how much they could consolidate of this. So for now, these remain the most important spots around the city. Any prospect of Russian troops surrounding the capital seems a lot further away than maybe a few weeks ago.
Our correspondent Matthias Bollinger reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you so much, and please stay safe. After a month of war, many have been surprised at the strength of Ukraine's defense. But the human cost of the conflict remains high, with the number of both military and civilian casualties growing by the day. And amid the destruction, people are having to bury their friends and family in some of the most difficult circumstances. DW correspondent Amyan Esif sent us this story on a slain soldier from a small village close to the Polish border.
A house fallen silent. He was just 20 years old, hit by Russian artillery on day 3 of the war. It took weeks for his family to learn of his death and bring him home. People from all around came to Dmytro's funeral to honor him.
He was a true Cossack, and he smiled a lot. He was funny, artistic. He always wanted to help everyone. He loved us all so much. He wanted to keep this family together. We'll remember him as an amazing person, an amazing brother.
The Vasyutas are a military family. Dmytro's sister said their father is considered by many a hero of the Donbass conflict. It seemed natural that her brother would choose the same path. Dmytro's schoolhouse. His teacher received the news of his death with a mixture of pain and pride.
We saw each other for the last time on the 12th of February, and he said, "Okay, goodbye, we'll never see each other again." And I said to him, "You can't say that."
I ask if his death has scared any of the young men in the village who may one day have to face the front lines.
Absolutely not. It will give them more courage and strength, maybe even make them angry enough to take on such a responsibility. Nobody is afraid. It's no longer 2014. There's a completely different feeling. In Western Ukraine, we've always seen military service as a responsibility. A duty is a duty.
A lesson instilled at a young age here. Theirs is not to reason why. The cemetery where Dmytro is buried. His grave is visible from a distance, and it seems as if it's the very center of the town. A tragedy, but piled high with flowers.
Amin Asif reporting for us there. Now we can take a look at some of the other developments in the war. Germany is examining the possibility of erecting a missile shield over its entire territory to defend against threats such as those posed by Russia. According to information obtained by the newspaper Bild am Sonntag, Berlin is considering buying the Iron Dome missile defense system from Israel. Ukraine's deputy prime minister says Ukraine and Russia have agreed to 2 humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians from frontline areas. It includes allowing people to leave by private car from the southern city of Mariupol, which has been devastated by weeks of bombardment. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting with his counterparts from Israel and 4 Arab countries to discuss reviving a 2015 deal to limit Iran's nuclear program. Blinken wants to reassure Israel and its Gulf allies that Washington is committed to their security ahead of the accord's possible renewal. Now, Israel and its allies oppose the deal. They fear it will not stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And DW correspondent Tanya Kramer is in Jerusalem for us. Hi, Tanya. Thank you so much for joining us. This summit begins on Sunday evening. What can we expect?
Well, I have to tell you, it's quite unprecedented to see those foreign ministers from Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Egypt, and of course the US coming together in the south of Israel on the invitation by the Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Now, we have not been told what they will be talking about. They will be coming together on Sunday evening for a dinner, and on Monday we're expecting them on meetings on the ministerial level. Also, some statements are expected afterwards, but we expect them that one of the issues is a key issue will be Iran and its nuclear program and its influence in the region. We've been for weeks now, for months actually, I have to say, world powers and Iran, with the US indirectly taking part, have been negotiating a possible return to the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action from 2015, from which the US withdrew in 2018, and we've heard that they might be close to a conclusion of these talks, and that is a main concern for Israel, but also for its other Arab allies here, like the United Arab Emirates, and this is one of the concerns they will be talking about. I think they will also want to hear from the US some reassurances once such a deal might be concluded, because the US is seen as having a bit less engaged in the region in recent years.
As you touched on, I mean, 5 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. What does the meeting in Israel tell us about shifting alliances in the Middle East?
Well, as you said, we wouldn't have seen that like 5 years ago. These new alliances are based on the so-called Abraham Accords or normalization peace agreements between the Emirates, the Bahrain, and also Morocco that were actually agreed upon from the previous, with the help of the previous US administration under President Donald Trump. And I think also the Biden administration has said, you know, they want to continue support those peace agreements. So we wouldn't have seen that. That was in 2020. We wouldn't have seen such, coming together of the foreign ministers. And I think this will, this shows how alliances are actually shifting here in the region, how the landscape also politically has changed, and, that these countries want to show a united front in front of threats which they perceive here in the region.
DW's Tanya Kramer reporting for us from Jerusalem. Thank you so much. I want to bring you up to speed now with some of the other stories that we are following for you at this hour. Women's rights activists in Afghanistan have called for nationwide protests if the Taliban fail to reopen girls' secondary schools within a week. Thousands of girls returned to classes on Wednesday after the Taliban reopened schools for the first time since seizing power last August. But just hours later, the hardline Islamists closed girls' schools again. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats look set to win regional elections in the small state of Saarland. Exit polls show the SPD on course to topple the Conservatives there for the first time in over 20 years. It's the Social Democrats' first test since winning the federal election in August. Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have announced a 3-day truce with the Saudi-led coalition. This comes days after the rebels launched drone and missile attacks on Saudi Arabia. One of those missiles had hit a location near the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix race route in Jeddah. But that race still went ahead as planned. Red Bull's Sergio Perez took a career-first pole position ahead of Sunday's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. The Mexican prevailed after a qualifying session plagued with accidents. Well, German Mick Schumacher had a horrendous-looking crash during the second phase and had to be airlifted to hospital, but luckily apparently suffered no injuries. Qualifying was suspended for about an hour as a result, and Schumacher's car was completely destroyed. And the film industry is still struggling to rebound from the coronavirus pandemic, but despite heavy economic setbacks, Tinseltown is in the mood to party. The 94th Annual Academy Awards are upon us, and Hollywood is getting ready for its biggest night of the year. After a scaled-back ceremony in 2021, the Oscars are back at the legendary Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles. The lovers of the big screen might be in for some disappointment, as streaming services are expected to win big across the board.
It's almost showtime. The final preparations are underway. The red carpet is rolled out, and the famous gold statues stand tall. A night of glamour and prestige is to be expected for the first fully in-person Oscars since 2020. The pandemic has played a role for many of Hollywood's finest. Actor and director Kenneth Branagh says that the coronavirus era impacted his direction of Belfast, for which he has been nominated for Best Director.
One became very aware of what you regarded as precious, things that you might have taken for granted suddenly took on a terrific importance. So this story is particularly with the chance of seeing it through a child's eyes, a 9-year-old's. I thought maybe there's something that can be understood about this by telling this story now.
One of the top contenders for Best Picture is The Power of the Dog, featuring Benedict Cumberbatch and directed by Jane Campion.
Only another myth.
Will Smith is a likely candidate for the Best Actor award for his performance in King Richard, where he plays the father of tennis stars Serena and Venus Williams.
Dangerous creature on this whole earth. It's a woman who knows how to think. You gonna show them how dangerous you are?
The animated film Flea is up for an unusual hat-trick of Best Documentary Feature, Best Animated Feature and Best International Film. It's a Danish production about a gay Afghan man that hopes to humanize the refugee experience. The evening will be hosted by Regina Hall, Amy Schumer and Wanda Sykes, entertaining movie lovers across the globe as they sit on the edge of their seats for Hollywood's biggest night of the year.
And the Oscar goes to...
That is your news update at this hour. Don't forget, you can always find more news and analysis on our website. That's at dw.com, or you can check us out on social media. We're at DW News. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. For me and the team here working behind the scenes, thank you so much for joining us.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
The glitz, the glamour, the sparkles. Mardi Gras is coming to the ABC.
What a thrill it is to be engaging with art.
It's about equality. We're there to play the same game.
No matter where you live in this big, beautiful country, we're here for you.
Travelling the roads that connect communities.
All over Australia. Connecting with you in 2022.
This town has just lurched from one disaster to another.
Having your house burned down works really well. You get rid of everything. It's like a big clean out. Malakuta needs to advocate for what we want.
We feel we know best about what we need.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies.
We are having a Malakuta election.
There'll be no chance that they'll choose me.
The opportunity is now to build back better.
People's Republic of Malakuta starts April 5 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
I've covered more than 80 elections for the ABC over the last 3 decades.
Doesn't get better than Anthony Green, one of my favourite colleagues.
Anthony Green is extraordinary. I've never seen anyone like him.
He is absolutely unbelievable.
His capacity to understand numbers as they're coming in and explain them.
All of the politicians, from Prime Minister to Opposition Leader, waits for Anthony Green to call it. An amazing asset to our election coverage.
And I'm quite happy to continue to do it for a few more years yet.
Basketball's best are booming to the finals. Stream every electrifying play live on ABC iView.
What a statement.
The WNBL Finals. Stream all finals live on ABC iView.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing? 1,000 jobs.
Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView. Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150? Would the world be better without lies?
No.
If you had a deep fake video of you, are we going to the tape?
Well, if there are thousands of gods, how do you know you've chosen the right one?
You would answer that in a light entertainment format.
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView. To keep streaming on ABC iView, you now need to log in with an ABC account. So log in and save something you want to enjoy later by adding it to your watch list. Pick up where you left off across logged-in devices. Plus, check out recommendations to unearth new shows and movies.
So, when does the show start?
Log in with an ABC account and make ABC iView yours.
We're selling an idea of paradise, summers that never end.
What about loyalty? What about friendship?
Snapper's building an empire.
This is war.
Barons starts April 24 on ABC or log into ABC iView.
Post-economic growth family had never lost live performance.
Calls for financial help as communities devastated by floods wonder what their future holds. Traditional owners launch legal action over a mega gas project in the Timor Sea. And the quest to find the top dog at the Australian sheepdog trials. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Guy Stainer with a look at some of the stories making headlines in regional and rural Australia. The recent floods in the northern rivers of New South Wales have left countless people traumatised and worrying about their future. In Lismore in particular, residents are asking should they stay or go? And if they do rebuild, how can they protect their town from future disasters? Bruce McKenzie has this report from Lismore.
Parts of Lismore still resemble a ghost town. There's no power, the shops are boarded up, hundreds of homes are empty, and the stench of decay is thick in the air.
It's heartbreaking to see your town that you love so much hurting so much.
Turn one and none in the other turn.
Lismore Mayor Steve Krieg's CBD cafe is operating out of a caravan. Business is brisk and there's virtually no competition. But the damage done by a second major flood in less than 5 years has left many people spooked.
I know people that aren't going back to South Lismore. You know, they don't want to do it anymore. You know, people won't want to go back to North Lismore.
Flood insurance is a luxury few can afford.
It's about 20 centimetres over.
For people like Will Nissen and Nikki Fitzsimons, it will be a case of clean up and start again.
There's really no other option though. It's not like we've got money hidden somewhere that we can just go and buy somewhere that doesn't flood.
And for those who decide to sell up and move on, it's unclear what their properties will be worth.
It's the unknown. Realistically, you know, we've been speaking to a lot of finance brokers, valuers, and we're a little bit of an unknown.
Lismore is the regional centre of the Northern Rivers, home to a major hospital and university. Flooding is part of its history.
Much of Lismore is underwater this morning.
There's been massive evacuations made from the flooded areas.
The city's $21 million levy was overtopped in 2017, but this latest flood was almost 3 metres higher and 2 metres above the highest levels ever recorded.
The best part of 24 hours in the lead up to the flood.
SES Flood Intelligence Officer Ed Bennett says there's a worrying trend.
I calculated that the 2017 flood was the 1 in 35-year flood. But we've had 5 of those in the last 60 years.
You wanted to catch up on something?
Former Mayor and Chair of the Lismore Floodplain Management Committee, Vanessa Eakins, says it's not as simple as building a bigger levee.
We'd need something like from the Game of Thrones to protect us from the water that we saw in this event.
The federal government has promised $10 million for a Northern Rivers flood modelling study. The Commonwealth could also underwrite insurance, as it did recently in far north Queensland.
It's there now, it's a vehicle that we can use, and we have to look at that as well, because, as you said, people can't get flood insurance. We've got market failure.
The impact is going to be felt regionally, right? And when Lismore isn't doing well, it really does put a bit of a drain on the rest of the region.
Lismore may now have an unwanted reputation as Australia's flood capital, but the community's ability to bounce back from a major flood only 5 years ago was remarkable. After the traumatic events of the past few weeks, that resilience will be tested like never before. Bruce McKenzie, ABC News, Lismore.
The effects of the catastrophic flood event in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales are weighing heavily on the business community. Latest data shows 80% of businesses in the Lismore area have been affected, prompting calls for a JobKeeper-like scheme to be reintroduced.
It's anything but business as usual on the flood-ravaged far north coast. When solicitor Tracy Randall isn't in court, she's doing her best to keep her business in Lismore's CBD open.
I have solicitors who have been on vacuum, carpet shampooers, they've been shovelling mud, they've been on gurneys.
There are more than 3,000 businesses in the Lismore area affected by floods. The local council estimates 18,000 people are currently not coming to work in the city. That's prompted calls for a scheme similar to JobKeeper to be introduced.
There's no actual work going on. There's no money coming into the door. I'm trying to hold on to my staff.
I am fully supportive and have already started to lobby ministers, both federally and state, that we need a package, and we need it soon, because this is timely, because otherwise people may start to lose their employees to other towns.
Further north in the Tweed Shire, more than 190 businesses have been flood affected. About half of those are still closed as the clean-up continues. It's a double whammy for Tony Zushki. Her Murwillumbah home and interiors business both flooded, and her husband lost his work too.
We've applied for some disaster payments back in 3rd of March, and then nothing's come through yet. So we're just sort of living off savings and donations.
On one hand, small businesses can access $50,000 in government support to help with the clean-up and repairs, or they can get $10,000 to pay bills and staff. But they can't have both. For small businesses trying to get back on their feet, it seems there are still plenty of obstacles. Bronwyn Herbert, ABC News, Lismore.
South Australia's new Premier, Peter Malinauskas, has continued his busy start to the job with a trip to the southeast city of Mount Gambier. Mr Malinauskas says the region has plenty of economic potential and has vowed to honour more than $100 million of election pledges for the Limestone Coast.
Day 3 as Premier, and for Peter Malinauskas, it's promises made
promises kept.
I said to the people of Mount Gambier, including Troy Beale, before the election, that within 72 hours of being sworn in, I would be right here on the ground.
He's genuine, he cares, and I'm really looking forward to having a productive working relationship with him over the next 4 years.
Mr Malinauskas made a $100 million commitment to the Mount Gambier region during the campaign and today recommitted to the investment, starting with his signature policy across the state, health.
There is lots of good quality jobs down here to be had, right?
Labor has promised $52 million to improve the South East's health system, including upgrades for the Mount Gambier and Narracourt hospitals and 24 more paramedics. The reception for Mr Malinauskas was infinitely more positive than that given to another Labor Premier more than a decade ago. Back then, Jay Weatherill was delivering the message that timber assets would be sold off.
I think selling the forest is wrong. But we can't go back in time. We can only go forward.
And his forward plan has $15 million to grow the forest industry, including setting up a research and development centre and training skilled workers.
This is not a risky proposition.
Halving rock lobster licensing fees for the next financial year is also low risk, and it's something the industry says is needed as it struggles with reduced exports to China. So all up, a well-received trip to an electorate Labor doesn't hold. The seat of Mount Gambier remains an independent stronghold, with Troy Bell securing a resounding win on Saturday. But there is still a cloud over the local MP, who's facing 2 separate court cases on dishonesty charges.
Presumption of innocence has to be first and foremost in people's minds. My interest isn't about who represents the seat of Mount Gambier. My interest is in realising the potential that exists around this great community.
3 days down for the Premier, and many more to come.
Traditional owners in the Northern Territory have launched international legal action in a bid to block a mega gas project worth almost $5 billion. The Barossa project is one of the biggest oil and gas ventures announced in Australia in recent years. But some Tiwi and Larrakia elders say they're concerned about potential environmental impacts.
For Tiwi people, these waters off the western tip of Bathurst Island are their traditional sea country. But plans for a gas pipeline 6 kilometres off the coast are causing deep concern for clan elders.
It will affect the sea, marine, like sea turtles, dugong, fish, and whatever in the water.
Last year, energy company Santos confirmed plans for its multi-billion-dollar Barossa gas project, which will extend the life of its Darwin LNG facility by around 2 decades.
This is the largest investment in the oil and gas sector in Australia for almost 10 years.
The project will see gas extracted from the Barossa field in the Timor Sea before it's piped past the Tiwi Islands and then onto Santos's LNG facility in Darwin Harbour. But Tiwi and Larrakia elders say the project is proceeding without adequate consultation.
They need to avoid what we want. You know, what we want. Did they ask us what we want? They didn't ask us.
Lawyers acting on their behalf have now taken legal action in South Korea in a bid to stop loans being given to one of Santos's main joint venture partners.
We have filed an injunction in the South Korean court in Seoul against the South Korean Export Bank, it's a government-owned bank, to block funding, about $1 billion, to the Barossa project.
That's always any individual's right to undertake legal action, but what I would say is that the processes that have taken place, whether they be here in the Northern Territory or in any other part of the country, are ones that have been long-standing and tested.
Santos is not a defendant in the case, but in a statement the company says the Barossa gas project has all the necessary approvals in place, and we undertake consultation with all key stakeholders where they receive detailed information about the project, a view not shared by those opposed to the Barossa gas project, which is set to begin production in 2025. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
Expectant mums in Victoria's southwest are desperately reassessing their birth plans after a hospital suddenly shut its birthing suites for 3 months. The Portland Hospital is struggling to attract enough midwives to keep its maternity suite open, forcing women to travel more than an hour to give birth. Daniel Miles reports.
Welcome to the farm.
Each morning, Jessa Laws tends to her bovine babies while nervously awaiting the arrival of her own. Her newborn child could come at any moment, and it's been an exciting but tense wait.
Stressed, a little bit tired. I'm not sleeping very well at the moment, and waking up at every little niggle.
Adding to her stress is the fact her local hospital in Portland has paused its birthing services due to a lack of midwives, throwing a very last-minute spanner in the works for the mum-to-be.
This is the most vulnerable moment of your life, and suddenly we're looking at spending at least an hour to an hour and a half in the car for some of us.
Jess is one of 31 mums whose plans to give birth in Portland have been thrown into disarray. Their only options now are to travel to Warrnambool, Hamilton or across the border to Mount Gambier. Who's there? 2-year-old Zara Wilson's expecting to meet her little sister any week now. Zara entered the world after an hour-and-a-half labour. If Tiana's second labour lasts that long, she'll probably have to give birth on the side of the road.
I said to my partner, I'm like, you better start YouTubing how to give birth. Or how to deliver a baby.
It's a situation the hospital wishes it could avoid.
Shortages of this nature are quite common in regional health services across Australia. Unfortunately, this one has caught up with us.
This is not going to be acceptable to most of our rural communities. Our understanding is that this happened because of a shortage of midwives. This is a nationwide problem.
Little Riley was the last scheduled baby born at Portland before the hiatus begun. Mum Claire feels for other mums that don't have that option.
It's very unfortunate and very sad that their preference of where they'd like to birth isn't available to them when it really, really needs to be.
The hospital says it's reassessing the situation every 6 weeks, but that's little comfort to those with a fast approaching due date.
At the end of the day, with a birth looming at literally any stage, not much is helping my anxiety about that.
Meaning a nervous 9-month wait continues. Daniel Miles, ABC News, Portland.
Outdated and inconsistent legislation is being blamed for putting a handbrake on what could be Tasmania's next agricultural success story. Hemp growers are governed by strict laws about how they process the plant's leaves, leaving farmers earning just a fraction of the crop's true potential.
It's harvest time in the hemp industry. The crop has more than 15,000 uses, but this farm is only taking the seeds.
That's all we do down here, just get the seed for it, and the rest is all trash. Just gets left out of the header.
Australian farmers can easily harvest hemp seeds and stalks, but they need to follow strict rules to use the leaves. That's where the psychoactive compound THC is found. Regulators treat all crops as one, even though most hemp varieties are drug-free.
They haven't caught up with the reality of the situation where there is a distinction between marijuana and hemp.
A hectare of hemp could be 5 times more valuable if farmers were able to use the leaves to manufacture skincare products, insecticides and essential oils. Canada relaxed their laws in the 90s. Now they're leading a $5 billion industrial hemp market.
Learn on our mistakes and successes. You just don't try to reinvent a wheel.
A cottage industry producing a sustainable construction material called hempcrete is not restricted by current laws, but reform could boost its scale and credibility.
We're in desperate need of capital. Often the banks consider what we're doing to be too high risk, and we're often considered not innovative enough for other types of lending. So it's a bit of a tricky spot.
Sydney fashion entrepreneur Vanessa Conrad has plenty of customers wanting hemp clothes, but she can't find any produced in Australia.
People talk about being a chicken and egg situation in terms of, producers here want to grow and produce the fiber, but then they say they don't have the designers and the producers to buy and then market it.
Farmers hope that legislative reform will supercharge the industry, but the biggest change they need is a cultural one. Because in the minds of many people, there's little difference between a plant produced for medicinal or illegal purposes and crops like this one. Tasmania is currently reviewing its hemp legislation, but the most important reforms need to occur at a federal level.
What we need is an opening up of the industry to be able to exploit the other advantages of the plant.
An open industry could be the first chapter of Australia's next agricultural success story. Lachlan Bennett, ABC News, Cressy.
The federal government will allocate $5.4 billion in next week's federal budget to building a new dam in North Queensland. The Hells Gates Dam would be located 120 kilometres northwest of Townsville and would be the largest in Queensland, helping to open up 60,000 hectares of irrigation across the region. But not everyone is happy. Kennedy MP Bob Catter says the announcement reneges on a government promise to extend irrigation to Western Queensland.
This great project has been whittled down to absolutely nothing, and there's no way that I can defend the government.
The funding is subject to the approval of a detailed business case. 2 marine parks have been established by the federal government in the Indian Ocean, spanning an area larger than the Great Barrier Reef. The marine parks at Christmas Island and Cocos Keeling Islands are home to species like turtles and whale sharks and cover more than 740,000 square kilometres. The government says 99% of the protected areas will be classified as offshore, meaning activities like fishing and mining will not be allowed. $5.4 million has been set aside to manage the parks. Concerns are being raised about the condition of Western Australia's most popular national park. The Lewin Naturalist National Park in the Margaret River region attracts more than 4 million visitors a year. But as Anthony Pancia reports, tourism and environment groups are worried it's being loved to death.
Got everything?
Seasoned travellers Rowena Hodgson and Grant Ball are working their way through the world's national parks.
And we've been through Kakadu and the parks up in north of WA. South America.
Africa. Their assessment of Margaret River's Lewin Naturalist National Park is it plays a distant second fiddle to the region's other big attraction.
To come from north, from Yallingup, it's just a general progression into the Margaret River wine area, really. Yeah.
And that's what the focus is around with signage and stuff you see, isn't it? The vineyards.
Marketing of the 22,000 hectare biodiversity hotspot is focused on vineyards and wide open spaces. But there's concern the 4 million people who visit the park every year are having a negative impact on it.
People love coming here, but the thing is with the whole concept of that is they actually are loving it to death, really. It's here for everyone to enjoy, but we need to protect it and look after it.
Traditional custodians, environmental groups and the local tourism association have joined forces to push for state government intervention to reboot how the park is managed and marketed to ensure it's protected.
It doesn't have a great identity at the moment. Even locals don't quite know when they're in the national park or when they're not.
The group are calling for substantial government investment aimed at making it more enjoyable for people to visit while making it clear they are in a national park.
We're certainly not talking gates. We're not talking gates. What we're talking about is making sure that there is a recognition that when one enters this national park, one is going into a special place.
Proponents say management of the park is hindered by its elongated shape, multiple entry points and the fact that there's only 4 rangers patrolling it, leaving visitors largely free to carve their own tracks. Their wish list includes additional rangers, more curated experiences for travellers and a stronger representation of the area's original custodians, the Wadandi people. Environment Minister Rhys Whitby told the ABC the government would consider the proposal while working to protect and enhance the park. Anthony Pancia, ABC News, Lewin Naturalist National Park.
The Australian Defence Force has wrapped up a 2-month operation in Tonga after a deadly volcano and tsunami struck the islands. HMAS Canberra has docked in Townsville, where hundreds of troops will reunite with family after months away. Jade Toomey reports.
Another mission complete. The Australian Defence Force back on home soil in Townsville after Tonga was flattened by a volcanic eruption and tsunami in January.
Entire communities just completely obliterated and pushed into the ocean by the force of the tsunami.
Over the past 2 months, Operation Tonga Assist has delivered more than 400 tonnes of equipment to help the islands rebuild. For some troops, there was more than one natural disaster at hand.
And of course, we had our own natural disaster going on at the same time. So we did have personnel embarked in the ship with their families in southeast Queensland or northern New South Wales.
The operation wasn't entirely smooth sailing, with crews affected by COVID on the way to Tonga and the initially deployed ship, the HMAS Adelaide, affected by a massive power outage.
Definitely trying conditions for across for the force. What I'd offer is it didn't affect the mission.
The struggle worth it for Australia's grateful Tongan community.
It's meant a lot to me, you know. Feel so blessed that Australia is giving us a hand.
The troops have now returned into the arms of loved ones.
I've been here since 5 o'clock this morning waiting. Amazing, very proud mama, very proud.
Jade Toomey, ABC News, Townsville.
The Targa Tasmania car rally will return to the roads of the state in a few weeks with some key changes. New rules for the event will come into effect after the deaths of 3 competitors last year. But as Loretta Lohberger reports, some residents along the track are calling for more protection.
For almost 30 years, Targa competitors have sped through the winding roads of Tasmania, an event big on the motorsport calendar. But last year, the rally turned to tragedy. 3 men were killed in 2 separate crashes.
We've never hidden away from the shock of losing 3 people in the space of really 24 hours over 2 days. It's caused dramatic change in our space and our event and the way we go about running it.
In the wake of the crashes, 23 recommendations were made to better protect competitors. The main rule changes are an effective speed limit of 200 kilometres an hour and allowance for 4 more tyre changes.
On wet stages, crews will be able to change onto a bit like Formula 1 do, they change their tyres depending on the conditions, and so they'll have an extra 4 tyres, which again will provide them more grip on the wet and slippery roads.
This was the mess left for Huon Valley resident Bill Hilston. He had a close call when one of last year's competitors crashed into his shed. He'd been in that shed just minutes before.
I must confess it was fairly shaky. It's quite a shock to have that happen.
With the race taking part on closed public roads, he says more is needed to protect people and property along the route.
If they're going to race on people's streets, that the properties along those streets be protected.
We've been on that road for many, many years without incident, but it did show it can happen, and we have reviewed the course.
There won't be a southern stage this year, but Targa says it hasn't given up on the south. The Tasmanian Rally is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and more than 500 cars are expected to hit the road. Loretta Lohberger, ABC News.
Working dogs from around the country are competing in Canberra this weekend with a view to being crowned Australia's top dog. As Antoinette Radford reports, a record number of competitors from far and wide are taking part in this year's national sheepdog trials.
Eager to impress and be the best, these dogs and their trainers mean business. Up for grabs is the coveted Duke of Gloucester sash, a prize first presented by the Duke to the National Sheepdog Trial Association in 1945.
Winning Wimbledon for the tennis players or Melbourne Cup for the jockeys, that's what it is for the sheepdog triallers.
The goal sounds simple: to finish with the highest number of points after shepherding 3 sheep into a pen.
I'm looking to find a dog that can run 100 points. Start with 100 and retain all those points by the time it has completed all the obstacles on the course.
But moving such a small number of sheep is no walk in the park.
It is easy to move a mob of 100, 150, 200 or whatever. 3 sheep is really tricky. They want to be in a mob.
Murrum Bateman farmer, 88-year-old Laurie Slater, is the oldest competitor in this year's trials.
I've been following these dog trials for about 30 years, so thank Christ I'm still with them.
Laurie won the event in 2014 and is hoping to repeat his success in tomorrow's final.
She works like a dream. She put on a real good demonstration, so I was happy, and so were the girls.
This year, there has been a renewed interest in the competition, with a record 358 dogs competing across the week. But with so many dogs, there can only be one winner.
I'll probably only find one friend at the end of this trial.
And the top dog will be crowned tomorrow. Antoinette Radford, ABC News.
And those are just some of the stories making headlines in regional and rural Australia. Don't forget, you can continue to access ABC News programs, including a dedicated regional news page across all your devices and on iView. I'm Guy Stainer. Thanks for your company. See you next time.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
Australia's roadmap to recovery. What the make or break budget means for the government, the country and for you. From 7:30, the Treasurer's speech, then all the interviews and expert analysis in the ABC News Budget Special. Budget Night 2022, Tuesday, ABC TV, iView, radio and online.
Next time on Artworks, we're coming to you from the Lawn Sculpture Biennale.
For me, the journey of life is one that leaves a mark, and the sea speaks very strongly to me of that.
We also explore the Sydney Biennale.
Artworks, Wednesday at 8 on ABC iView and TV+.
Children aged 5 to 11 years can now receive their free COVID-19 vaccine. It's the best way to protect them, your family, and community. All vaccines are thoroughly tested before use and reduce a child's chances of getting sick. Talk to your GP, pharmacist, or healthcare professional if you have questions. Book now at australia.gov.au. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Trace and I, we're building a future. We're selling an idea of summers that never end. The company is called Lightwave, and we're making board shorts. It is my company, Trotter.
Snapper's building an empire.
Wait, this isn't what I came for.
I'm coming home, I'm coming home, I'm coming home to you tonight.
When did all this stop being fun?
Barons starts April 24 on ABC or log into ABC iView.
Today on Landline, the end of an era as the last sardine fisher pulls in his nets.
You know, I fished with the old man from when I was 6 or 8. Never worked another day's work or another job in my life.
The secrets of black garlic.
It comes out with this really sweet, umami flavoured taste that tastes nothing like garlic taste, which is a real big shock when you first taste it.
And the new faces of farming.
Because the ag sector now is a sexy place to be. Smart, young, driven, intelligent people. It's not the bottom of the class kid that there's his future going back and working on the farm.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Next Friday marks the end of an era in Melbourne's Port Phillip Bay, when the last commercial fishing nets are pulled after 150 years of supplying fresh local seafood. It follows an election promise to recreational fishers, which will deliver hundreds of tonnes of fish. But as Landline's Sean Murphy reports, it may also lead to a shortage of bait.
For 45 years, Phil McAdam has fished the waters of Melbourne's Port Phillip Bay for sardines, also known as pilchards.
Never done anything any different, and I wouldn't know how to do anything any different, you know. From the age that, well, from way before 13, the age of 13, you know, I fished with the old man from when I was 6 or 8, and never worked another day's work or another job in my life. If this machine ain't on the boat, well, you don't go.
For an old veteran like you, this must feel like cheating.
It was very hard to get used to in the early days, yeah. Very hard to understand, but once you get to understand them and know how to use them, it makes fishing a hell of a lot easier.
The technology may have changed, but the fishery is much the same as it was when Phil McAdam was fishing with his father. The nets are set just minutes out from Australia's second largest city. With his deckhand of almost 30 years, Carl Spicer, and daughters Claire and Kat, they supply about 160 tonnes of pilchards a year for the food and bait markets. But as of April the 1st, they're being forced to shut their business down. Before the 2014 Victorian election, thousands of recreational fishers marched and signed petitions calling for a ban on all net fishing in Port Phillip Bay. Both Labor and the Coalition listened. About 40 commercial net fishers were offered $27 million in buyouts to stop net fishing in the bay. Phil McAdam chose to keep fishing for as long as he could and will lose 50% of the compensation buyout because he did not accept it in 2016.
I said to me crew and me workers 6 years ago, I said, I'm not going to take this offer. Your payout will be another 6 years of work. That's all I can offer you. You know, because I've lost money by not taking the payout. It's not about the money. I don't want their money. I just want to go to work. You know, and that's what the crew wants to do. You know, that resource out there belongs to the Victorian public. They're the ones that are going to miss out.
Ironically, a policy designed to favour recreational fishers will deprive them of Melbourne's only source of fresh local bait. Phil McAdam supplies about 80 tonnes a year. The government says there'll be no shortage. A sardine business at Lakes Entrance will make up any shortfall.
It is a huge resource, but we, for many reasons, struggle to get Lakes Entrance pilchards. They're not available on the open wholesale market for bait and tackle shops.
David Kramer is a director of the influential Future Fish Foundation, which pushed the previous Fisheries Minister hard for net bans and other pro-recreational policies.
It's been a big year, hasn't it? It has been a big year. I've learned a lot about fishing, I can tell you.
Yeah. Tonight we've got the to-do list, the Jala list, if you like.
He now admits it was a mistake to target the Port Phillip Bay sardine fishery. He says bait from Lakes Entrance and interstate is not as fresh and supplies are unreliable.
There's nothing better than a local product, and when you buy a Port Phillip Bay pilchard in a bait and tackle shop, it's probably only been out of the water for a week. There's no getting out of the buyout. There's no getting out of the 1st of April deadline. However, I will be speaking on behalf of the Future Fish Foundation to both major political parties leading into the Victorian government election later on this year, and I'll be asking them to resurrect a pilchard fishery in Port Phillip Bay, because there is a resource. The style of netting isn't environmentally damaging.
At the Melbourne Seafood Centre, they trade about $200 million worth of local and imported produce every year. Last year, 100 tonnes of Port Phillip Bay sardines were sold, compared to just 8 tonnes from elsewhere.
How long have you been buying the Port Phillip Bay sardines?
The last 35 years.
So what will you do after April the 1st?
I don't know. That's a big question. That's a very big question. Because we get very big demand on our sardines. It's a beautiful fish. People ask for it. And then what's going to happen? I don't know.
The government says there's enough sardines being caught in lakes entrance to supply.
They're not
Melbourne.
the same. They're not the same. You cannot replace these sardines with the lake centre sardines. They're not the same.
The market's chairman, Andy McLaughlin, says the net ban policy in Port Phillip Bay has already pushed prices higher for fresh local seafood.
The concern is these decisions could make local seafood largely unaffordable. If you ask the average Victorian in the street, there's no doubt they've got it wrong. It's gone way too far. People don't have access to fresh local seafood. It's right on their doorstep. Instead, they're appeasing the recreational fishermen, which may be maximum 1 or 2% of the population that are really avid recreational fishermen that go more than once a year sort of thing.
The Victorian government says its net ban will deliver 600 tonnes of additional fish for recreational fishers to reel in. But the bay will continue as an important resource for the commercial supply of seafood. 8 net fishers have been offered line and hook licences for snapper and are negotiating with Victorian fisheries on what other species they'll be able to target.
The species that the recreational fishermen don't want them to catch, they probably, at this stage, the fisheries bonus says they probably won't get any access to that at all, which is quite disappointing for the Victorian public. It's not looking that great, to be honest with you, at the moment. The limits on the bycatch other than snapper, which is the quoted fishery, are making it, a barely viable fishery, which is a bit disappointing because it may mean that it's not worth fishermen fishing.
The Victorian Fisheries Minister Melissa Horne declined to be interviewed. A spokesman said the government had invested $71 million since 2014 in building recreational fishing stocks. Efforts were being made to support workers affected by the closures.
I don't think they've even spoken to a deckhand. Yeah, the government's done nothing for us. Holden, Ford, Toyota employees, how much did the government pay them? Nothing for us. You know, it's disgusting.
Are you likely to look for another job in fishing?
Probably not in fishing. With my little one, like the work hours, I have to rely on other people to look after him, so unfortunately, it's just not an option.
Sadly, her almost 4-year-old son Noah won't get the chance to be the 4th generation macadam to follow the family into the business.
You know, he loves the fishing scene, you know, and yeah, that'll be very hard. Very hard.
Pretty emotional.
Yeah, very.
How do you reckon your last night out at sea will be?
A lot of people have said, oh, we're going to come for the last night and celebrate, you know, have a few beers and all the rest of it. I can't see anything to celebrate.
Hi, I'm Lucy Barber. The federal government has set aside more than $5 billion to help build the Hell's Gate Dam in North Queensland. But the funding hinges on whether a business case stacks up and environmental approvals. The National Party secured the deal, which is part of this year's federal budget, in exchange for supporting the government's net zero by 2050 climate target. The Hell's Gate Dam proposal has been around for 80 years. If it were completed, the Nationals say it would provide irrigation water for 60,000 hectares of farmland across the north. The federal budget will also include about $500 million to give more people access to fast internet in regional and remote areas. The Communications Minister, Paul Fletcher, says the government's upgrade will increase the NBN's reach by 50%. That'd give 120,000 homes access to fixed wireless instead of the NBN's Sky Muster satellite service. Fixed wireless is considered to be a superior service to Sky Muster. Flood victims across the East Coast are pleading with governments to help them move to safer ground. One community that's done that is Grantham in Queensland's Lockyer Valley region. Many Grantham residents took part in a land swap after the 2011 floods when 13 locals were killed. The council, with state and federal funds, bought land on higher ground and developed it into a new estate. People were then allocated blocks and they had to pay for the construction of their new homes themselves. But how realistic is it to move bigger towns, CBDs or even cities? Professor Jamie Pittick from the ANU's Fenner School of Environment and Society joins us now. Professor Pittick, let's take a town like Lismore in New South Wales, which has been hit by floods recently. Population around 27,000 people. How do you move a town of that size?
What it really needs is for state and local governments to move very quickly, find the higher ground and enable that subdivision to enable people to move. The government's got that right for the Grantham example in Queensland, but the other step is to provide the financial resources to enable everybody to move. That's what could have been improved in Grantham and what we now need.
One thing that governments have done in the past after natural disasters is buybacks. So rather than a land swap, people are paid by the government, local, state or federal money at the market rate for their damaged property, but then they have to go and find somewhere else to rebuild or buy. Take-up of that option historically has been quite slim. Why is that?
Well, people are often very attached to their community, understandably, and would prefer to remain in that area. And so that's where the land swap idea has tremendous advantages, because everybody can move together and retain all of their community activities and links and ties. So that is the best way to go socially.
What about the lack of affordable housing in Australia at the moment, though? People don't necessarily have enough money to do that, do they?
Well, it's certainly true that many people don't have the financial resources to move easily. That's where public support is required. The danger in not helping those people is that we trap them further and further into poverty as their homes are repeatedly destroyed by floods.
Grantham, though, was a small community. I come back to that question of how do you do it with such a big centre like Lismore, for example?
In most larger communities like Lismore, not everybody would need to move, probably only the most flood-prone places. It is expensive, yet it is a cost worth paying up front in order to enable people to get onto their lives with security and to ensure that the public isn't repeatedly needing to pay to rescue people and rebuild communities that are being wiped out time and again from repeat floods.
Professor Jamie Pittick, thank you.
Pleasure.
And finally, a viral music video created to lure a general practitioner to Temora in the New South Wales Riverina has paid off.
Are you searching for?
Locals in Temora made this catchy video called The Great Quack Quest back in 2019. A doctor in the UK was looking to move to Australia with his family when he saw the video on a GP forum online. He started looking closely at the town and decided to move there. He's now settling in as the town's new GP. And that's Landline News.
20 to 30 years ago, farm leaders and educators were alarmed at the decline in enrolments in agricultural courses at secondary and tertiary level. But it's a different story now. Courses are full and industry has introduced graduate internships and mentoring programs to develop the skills and leaders of the future. The biggest event on the Australian beef industry's calendar is Beef Week. COVID delayed the triennial event by a year, making it 4 years since the industry last gathered in such numbers in Rockhampton in central Queensland.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to thank Beef Australia for the opportunity.
No wonder there were so many smiles last year. Prices were at record highs, the drought was finally easing, and the country's best cattle and latest technology was on show.
They can be as pretty as we want out here, but they're carcasses and we need weight and meat on the hook when they end up at the meatworks. That's the ultimate aim.
But what buoyed industry stalwarts the most was the huge number of young people there, in and out of the arena.
The feeling here at Beef is, look at all the young people. We're watching them walk back and past the street here, and it's so good. It's so good.
In the mid-90s, the heads of tertiary ag institutions were fighting falling enrolments and reports that careers counsellors were advising students who were bright, who wanted to get into ag, to do something else and not waste their talent. So much has changed since then, and the evidence is all around me here at Beef Week.
There was so many kids out there. It was great to see. I think the beef industry is certainly in great hands. Not just the beef industry, but some of these students, especially mine, may even go into other agricultural industries as well, plant-based industries, cropping and things like that.
The bull we placed in third place today was bull number 1.
After decades of declining enrolments, high school ag education is booming. Toby Worley teaches at Monto, about 400 kilometres northwest of Brisbane. He noticed the turnaround 4 years ago.
So our ag classes are full. We can't actually take too many more kids in there, so it's great to see that there's so much interest in the agricultural industry, and I think the industry is certainly in good hands.
What's thrilled teacher Bill Oram from Yeppoon near Rockhampton is students with no farming background are part of the resurgence.
There seems to be a groundswell of interest in agriculture, in where our foods come from, how our food's produced.
That must be exciting.
It's extremely exciting. I can see some kids that have some students that have no background in agriculture becoming a part of the agricultural scene.
There's an enormous amount of ways to capture data, and it's becoming more affordable, but it's been really hard to validate, analyse and clean this data.
Beef Week showcased the wide range of jobs in the industry. Jobs you could do wearing work gear or suits, using a tractor or a laptop.
My Year 10 class is involved in a nationwide innovative technological advancement in agriculture course this term, and they're starting to see that there's just so many opportunities. And an event like this where they can wander around and see the latest gear, this opens their eyes.
Okay, so what's attracting so many to study ag at school and follow the competition circuit around the state with their cattle on weekends?
I love being in show team with the girls. It's a great opportunity to learn new things and get the confidence on public speaking. It's a really great opportunity for anyone to do.
Would you like to work in the industry?
I would love to. It's my dream to be doing this.
I want to go up north and being a ringer for a while, and then I want to come back home and take over from Mum and Dad on our property.
I definitely want to be a bit like my father and get some Nuffield scholarships and different scholarships like that, maybe manage a few properties as well.
This bull, he's another really wide bull. He just wasn't as tidy underneath as the bull above him.
Cattle judging requires students to give reasons for their rankings. Then the judge gives her opinion.
Our order was 3, 2, 4, 1. We placed this number 3 bull in first, as he tracks well, he has a tidy underline, he's wide and long and has a nice rounded rump.
Competing delivers life skills that will serve students well after school.
The teachers at school have seen a huge improvement in their public speaking in the classroom as well. Their confidence. One of the girls that spoke today, in 2018, she could hardly put a word together in front of the microphone, but today she up there and she done really well.
Number 2. Public speaking is really important, especially in today's industry, because you need to know how to speak to people, you need to know how to speak clearly and know what you're talking about.
At Rockhampton Grammar, agriculture is now one of the most popular subjects. And Hardy Manser says the old days of diverting the not-so-academically inclined into ag are over.
As ag education is evolving, we're really giving these kids a higher level of understanding.
You know, for our kids to be competitive in 10, 15 years when all those jobs have changed, we really need to give them not content knowledge, but those critical thinking solution skills to actually solve a problem on their property and remain competitive.
The school starts them young in prep, and with 35 commercial partners, seniors are exposed to all areas of the industry. Hardy Manser's proud so many students are choosing careers in agriculture.
398 kilos.
We've got an agreement with a local university, Central Queensland University, where they do their Certificate 3 and they actually go and do a Bachelor of Agriculture. From the Bachelor of Agriculture, they can go all the way through to a PhD right here at home.
I'm really excited to have Shannon here. Fantastic opportunity for us to hear about what's coming up and what the future might hold.
Happily hiring so many keen young people, increasingly holding tertiary qualifications, is David Bondfield. The average age of staff at Palgrove Stud and Cattle Properties is 27.
Because the ag sector now is a sexy place to be. Smart, young, driven, intelligent people. It's not the bottom of the class kid that there's his future going back and working on the farm. It's now the smart people that are in agriculture, and we're seeing a really good evolution of places in agriculture for city-based, country-based people.
No degree, no problem.
With dedication and learning, there's a scope for growth in the business, and so it started off as a jackaroo, might be the general manager to the CEO or whatever.
David says offering the chance to progress through the ranks is key to attracting and keeping young staff. And if you noticed teenage girls dominating in the show ring, the interest isn't stopping when they finish high school. At Palgrove, staffing's 50-50 men and women, and David believes women will eventually outnumber men on his properties.
And I think we're seeing that more and more, and in so many ways women are better in many jobs. That attention to detail for one, tidiness too, so a whole lot of things. So it's a really great mix. It makes it a good workplace.
Since mining boomed, recruitment has been a problem for the beef industry. David Bondfield says producers have realised if they can't match mine wages, they need to value and reward young staff. And if career progression isn't offered, they'll leave. Do you think the beef industry is getting better at pitching the jobs that they have as careers, not necessarily jobs?
And career is a much better word than a job, and that's absolutely 100% true.
Yeah. Station manager Tammy Krakow won a prestigious Nuffield Agricultural Scholarship to study ways the northern pastoral industry can better retain staff. She identified isolation, poor connectivity and lack of leadership training for early career managers as key causes of high staff turnover.
These days they won't put up with it and they'll often leave. If they're not good leaders, you'll see the culture will turn and it won't be a good culture. So we need to be able to help those leaders and mentor them through such a big role that they've got to be able to retain the staff that they've got.
Many producers have got the message. A range of industry and private mentoring programs are identifying the young leaders of the future and giving them the skills and encouragement to take the next step. 4 years ago, Australia's biggest beef company, AACo, started a graduate program to attract and keep young staff.
And it's really important to me that we have a really strong pipeline of young people coming through the business. Ultimately, they're the new leaders for AACo, and I think if you can build really good leadership in the business, they'll actually build the company. Love the young guys coming through, and ultimately they're the people who are going to be taking my job and running the company with any luck.
For 2 years, the graduates rotate through the company's stations, farms, feedlots and head office, learning about all aspects of the business. Graduates have degrees in agriculture, business, even law.
In the morning I might start with working on an agreement with a big mining company and then work on some sort of sustainability initiative or a livestock contract. There's definitely no 2 days that are the same with AACO.
Jacqueline Grinsell says she's learnt and experienced things she never imagined possible while studying law and agribusiness.
In October last year, I sort of was sitting in the office one week and then the next week was back out on station putting shoes on horses. So it's those opportunities are still there and yeah, really lucky to have that balance. Some of my favourite days on the graduate program was spent out mustering on horseback and watching Gulf region sunrises and sunsets on horseback. It's beautiful.
I didn't know what I was getting myself in for. I'd never heard of AACO before applying for the grad program. So, I was just a little Kiwi girl from the sticks, grew up with sheep.
Hannah Gibb, as you can tell, is a New Zealander. At Beef Week in 2018, she visited the AACO tent, where past graduates encouraged her to apply.
I knew then, when they explained to me what was sort of involved in the grad program, that I was in for the ride of a lifetime and a really sort of unique opportunity, I suppose, to get exposure to every aspect of the supply chain. And there just, at the time, wasn't any other opportunity that compared to what AACO and what AACO's graduate program could offer. I will rerun our cattle flows report and run a herd analysis out of Stock Fusion and re-look at where we're sitting cattle flows wise.
She's had 4-month placements on 4 stations and head office and is now an operations analyst at a feedlot.
Working with our processing team, forecasting our cattle weights and head numbers into processing and refining our kill schedules and things like that. So a lot of ad-lib reporting for managers, supporting them through projects, and a lot of budgeting, a lot of finance, a lot of numbers.
In Hannah's 2019 intake, all the grads were women, a first for the company. The feedlot where she works is run by a woman.
There's that perception of it being a male-dominated industry is slowly diminishing, and that's not the idea anymore. There's so many of us out there, and there's so many great role models and industry leaders that are women.
The beef industry can't rely on sourcing staff who grew up on farms. Feedlot boss Amanda Muin says industry needs to do more to promote itself to young city people. She loves seeing them start, stay and get promoted.
I've got wonderful examples from both yards, from kids coming from the city, from Ipswich, and now they're pen riders and station guys, and they're learning from the bottom, and that's the way to go. And I think these programs and the graduate programs, trainee programs within all of the companies really do promote that.
She remembers getting a hard time from older men when she first started working in sale yards years ago. Thankfully, she says that's stopped.
For the last 5-6 years, it's changing and it's evolving, and I think for me it's not about gender, it's about knowledge, experience, what you can offer companies, what you can offer your teams. And I think for me, I'm really proud to say that I'm part of the ag industry that's not male-dominated.
It's not just companies like AACO and Palgrove scouting for and developing young talent. Industry mentoring programs are filling that early career leadership training gap identified by Tammy Krukow. Amanda Muin was a beneficiary of the Beef Connections program, started 4 years ago in honour of late Queensland cattleman Graham Acton. Being mentored has changed her life.
It honestly gave me the opportunity to be where I am today, standing in front of you with no nerves and having a great time, showing how passionate I am about ag, beef, in particular my industry, feedlotting. But for me, it's just given us an understanding to actually be an advocate for ag and get our names out there in a positive way so young people can go, oh, she did it, and it's amazing.
At Beef Week, the 10 winners and their mentors from across the industry were announced. Program leader Barb Bishop has been there since the start.
Even in the first program, we had 1 or 2 people who changed their lives. Today, we've got 6 or 7 people saying, Barb, already, in 6 months, it's changed my life. One of the things we're finding with young people is that when you peel back one level of the onion, they're not so confident. And so this program is really about building that confidence to take those other steps to build their careers.
Righto. Adam Coffey is grateful he was paired with fellow Queenslander Phillip Hughes, joking he hasn't left his mentor alone since.
The fact that he has committed to supporting us on a longer-term basis just shows the sort of character that he is. He's got a few on the go. Well, I know he does officially, and then I think there's a few hanger-oners like us too. Poor bugger.
With Phillip's wise advice and support, Adam says he's a better farmer.
Valuable mentoring is a way to shortcut people's success, and if you can save on some mistakes that you might potentially make through some guidance from someone who's been there and done that, then as a whole industry, that's got to be a pretty powerful thing.
Now Adam is a mentor. His mentee, Caitlin Obst, says Beef Connections is the industry's best kept secret.
Adam's done a really good job at keeping me grounded, but also pushing me when I need it, so realigning my space in the industry and my personal life. He's been a fantastic soundboard. If anything, it's probably cemented my time in the industry even more. You won't see me leaving anytime soon.
Phillip Hughes says by setting him up with Adam and his wife Jack, Barb Bishop proved an excellent matchmaker.
Oh yeah, they're very special humans. And they're the sort of people we want in our industry. And there's lots and lots of young people in similar boat. But we just need to get them back into our industry. And they're there. They've just got to be encouraged.
The beef industry is no longer waiting for staff to find their way to it. And luckily, just as it's become more focused on staff retention and training solutions, there's been a resurgence in the appeal of a career in agriculture.
It's a great place to be. It's a good career to work in it. You can get city-based wages out in the bush now as well, whether you choose to be in the cattle industry or in cropping or some other parts. So we're really starting to see that groundswell of people actually interested in coming back to agriculture.
It's been a heck of a journey, and it sort of takes me by surprise sometimes, and I have to sort of remember, that we're at a 2.5-year, nearly 3-year mark now, so there's been a lot that's happened in that time. Yeah, absolutely. I knew I'd end up in ag, but I never in my wildest dreams imagined I'd come from a humble, small sheep and beef property in the rainy, windy Manawatu and end up, in a feedlot in Queensland. It's, a heck of a change.
Hannah Gibbs found a career for life and has advice for young people wondering if it would suit them too.
There's so much out there, and I think that the key message to them is to just put your hand up, get out there and have a go. Don't be daunted by it or scared by it, but just, hard work gets you a long way, and so does a bit of confidence and a good attitude.
Hello, I'm Kerry State, and I would like you to meet Patrick, a social media superstar. She, yes, she is owned by a Victorian farmer who has taken TikTok by storm. And next week on Landline, we're going to find out what it's like to be an ag influencer.
I'm in Darwin for the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, which this year has attracted its biggest ever crowd of more than 700 people. NT cattle producers have been enjoying record prices over the last 12 months, but there are some challenges on the horizon. One of the big talking points at this event was biosecurity and the threat posed by lumpy skin disease, which has been spreading through Asia and is now in Indonesia. The president of the NTCA says this is a major threat to Australia's cattle herd.
This is a clear and present threat. The Northern Territory government has sent officers over to Indonesia to firstly identify the disease and then work with Indonesian government and industry over there to put measures in place to try and lock down this disease and try and lock it into areas. One can assume that that's going to be a very difficult job, and so that we know as Australian cattlemen that this is a clear and present threat to the Australian cattle industry. It's a clear and present threat to the Northern Territory industry because we're right on the doorstep. We're the closest.
I've been told the live cattle trade out of the north could be stopped overnight if this disease is found in Australia. What's your understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding, Matt. The live export trade could be stopped. I think some export trades can be stopped. I think a lot of trade in Australia will come to a halt. This is quite an issue. It's not foot and mouth disease, but it's the next worst thing.
So what would you like to see from governments in terms of measures that could stop this disease from coming to Australia?
Well, I think it's probably, sadly, inevitable that it's probably going to get to Australia, Matt. But I think government is working very hard to prevent it in Indonesia to start with. I'm happy with the programs they're putting in place, very quickly, mind you, to try and prevent this disease. What we really want to do is make sure that the processes are in place, regulations are in place, people are in place, infrastructure's in place in Australia when this disease, or when and if this disease hits Australia. And the other big thing that would be very important is vaccination. We want to get a vaccination rolled out. We want to have vaccine available so that we can vaccinate cattle prior to this disease landing on Australian shores.
And in general, how is 2022 shaping up for NT cattle producers?
Well, for some cattle producers, Matt, it's fantastic. We've had rainfall mostly in the top end, early rainfall. But unfortunately, it's one of those years again where we're still waiting for rainfall at the end of the year. So certainly from just north of Katherine to well south of Katherine, down onto the Barkly, it's very, very dry. Alice Springs is enjoying a fantastic season. It might be suggested that it's a 1 in 10 year down there, so the buffel grass is flowing in the breezes and the cattle are fat and the calves are lowing. Fantastic. But certainly in that middle area, it's very tough. It was a very quick end to the wet, even though it was early.